Look, let's put our hands together one more time for the brilliant work. The theme is growth with depth for economic transformation. And for those of you who are wondering, diversification. Let's see if you remember. What's the E? Hey. Free SHS. Diversification. Export competitiveness. What is the P? Productivity increases. What is the T? And what is the H? Wow, what a lovely framework. Vice President was happy. Let's put hands together for the team again. Great. So our plan was to follow a certain structure, but it doesn't necessarily work that way. So the next group will be the private sector-led growth. Are they ready? You ready? Put your hands together for the team. The chair was Dr. Joe Mensah. Presenters include Mrs. Mansanete and Miss Abna Amoa of the Stock Exchange. Let's put our hands together for the private sector-led growth team. That's a tough act to follow. I'll be praying for you.
I need all prayers. Madam Vice President, it's indeed an honor to be before you as well. And to all the members of the private sector group, please stand up so we acknowledge you. Your Excellency, this was, to be said, a most vibrant group. We missed lunch yesterday because, true to private sector form, we did not want to go home until we cracked this. So thank you very much for that. And I also acknowledge the Minister of Trade, Agribusiness and Industry, who spent a lot of time and shared a lot of input with us. We have a presentation to share with you, and we can go to the first slide. So the first thing for the private sector is the macroeconomic environment. The private sector is clear that without a stable macroeconomic environment, we are just wasting our time. And that is why we were dying to hear from the first group, and which we know we will hear from. But a strong macroeconomic environment is critical for the success of the private sector. We are more than capable of delivering the growth that Ghana needs. And so, for us, what are some of the things to do? We discussed, Minister of Finance, that it is time to consider setting a limit for debt to GDP. Yesterday, from your presentation, we saw government's hands were in too many things that the private sector is more than capable of delivering. And so, a debt to GDP cap would allow room for private sector to operate and transform our economy. So for us, we spent a lot of time there. And we are even suggesting a 60% debt to GDP ratio. We must seriously consider this. As a second point of action for us, we think it's a low-hanging fruit. There are ways in which we can quickly improve our sovereign debt rating, which is currently in default. And so the committee is willing to sit with you, with the central bank, and see how we can quickly bring back confidence, not just for domestic investors, regional investors, and international investors around our corporate sovereign, our government sovereign rating. So that is an important thing. Your Excellency, policy consistency, coherence, and continuity across political regimes, as well as all sectors. Private sector frankly talked about the impact of breaks in policies and how it impacts our investments. This is one big ask that we want, so that there's a framework around how we discuss changes to policies and for us to plan and for our investments to bear fruit. So these are very important areas that we think government can move the needle on. Next slide, please. From the Minister of Finance's presentation, we saw the state of many of our state-owned enterprises. And today we are cut out of international capital markets. And our state-owned entities problem requires that we develop strong domestic financial and capital markets. That is the base on which we must grow our economy. And so for the state-owned enterprises, weak governance and lack of access to finance is a bane of our SOEs. And what do we propose? That GOG makes a policy that SOEs raise capital using the stock exchange and they comply with the Securities and Exchange Commission's corporate governance requirements. Because these are requirements that talk about who should be on the board, the minimum qualification, who appoints the CEO. And these are good practices that have enabled private companies to be 200 years old. And these are good enough for all SOEs. So this is a request from us. Cocobod and ECG, huge debts. 2015, we came up with a structure engaging capital markets that enabled us to ring-fence energy sector debts and ensure that our energy crisis was dealt with. So, our minister, let's look at engaging the capital markets again, especially for Cocobod and ECG, around how we restructure their debts and give them room to operate. But we will demand the best corporate governance of these institutions, their transparency and accountability to the investors that create the room for them. Next slide, please. Regulatory inefficiencies. So a few of these have been talked about. Inadequate collaboration among government agencies. Our private sector finds that a lot of the discussions are fragmented. We have various platforms such as the eGov platform, the payment systems. Maybe it's time for government to come up with a communication platform that is digital, that shows the various government sectors and ministries what is going on across for sector cohesion and supporting private sector development and investment. We learned that it takes the average local company about 57 days to set up and acquire licenses. We want to shorten this significantly. We are asking for business incorporation days of 5 days from over 50 days. Foreign companies take almost 70 days. With technology, we are able to do these. We request that any institution that requires a license to operate must come out with an SLA, a service level agreement that is transparent, that can guide private sector operators who say that before I go to you with my license, I know that if all my documents are together, within 5 days, within 10 days, I should get my license. And that is an important tool for us to operate. Compliance with certificates of conformity requirements. This is so important to our importers, and it will address some of the shortfalls we have with people importing substandard issues. And finally, for us, we'll see that the GIPC law was promulgated in 2013. The business environment has changed significantly since then. We ask for an urgent completion of the review of the GIPC law, but not just that, but that government comes up with a policy so that every law or legislation that affects businesses must have a minimum review period of 5 years. Technology is changing, business is changing, geopolitics is changing. We can't have 10-year-old laws on our systems if we want to transform and reset our economy. Next slide, please. Tax efficiency, we can talk and talk about it. Simple, crowd in more people. We are happy to work with our tax regulators and the ministries to come up with how we do this and deploy technology for collections. Deploy technology for collections. We say our tax to GDP ratio is substandard, but none of us can confidently say that everything that's collected gets into the bucket to be counted. Technology solves that problem. Stalled growth in our agriculture sector. Madam Vice President, we discussed this a lot. Our food security is important. The private sector is willing and able to invest in agriculture and its value chain. And so we want a coherent agriculture policy, one that we seek to finance around targeted industries. We discussed industries such as the agribusiness and other priority sectors for us, which I'll come to on my next slide. But the grains, tomatoes, we looked at those products that we spend billions of US dollars every year importing. This is our priority. Land banks for cultivation is important. Next slide, please. Financing the reset. This was a question Dr. Mwako left us with yesterday. High interest rates, short-term lending, no long-term access to finance, inflation, exchange rates, eroding everything. Governor of the Central Bank, we understand that due to liquidity requirements, there's a big pot of cash that banks have left at the Central Bank. Private sector says, let's come up with a framework. Let's create a 10 billion CD fund, a 15 billion CD fund. Let's take that money and on-lend to targeted priority agreed sectors, agribusiness, garments, salt, and whatever we agree with. Let's select champions. Import substitution and some export. Let's select champions. We need to move fast, we need to move quick, we need to move agile. Let's select champions and give them big amounts of money to lift up the sectors and have a medium-term policy or strategy to then grow the SME along with them. And so for us, this is an area we want to come and meet with you and your team as private sector, as the stock exchange, so that the companies that benefit from this have a path towards the stock exchange that allows all Ghanaians to buy into the shares of companies that we create that are successful from this. SOEs and pension funds. We worked 12 years ago to liberalize the pension fund industry. By the end of this year, private pension funds will have 100 billion Ghana cedis of funds under management. That's 20-year money, 30-year money that we must deploy into the productive sectors of the economy instead of full-time investment in only government treasury bills. So our pension funds are going to work with us to get into infrastructure, real estate, selected investments in SOEs. High cost of local production is the next one, and I think my previous speaker spoke a lot about that. Low productivity and work ethics. Madam Vice President, we want to change the work ethic culture in Ghana. And we encourage not just public sector, but also private sector to enhance productivity and enable Ghana to become more competitive. We want performance management systems that pertain in the private sector to become more widespread, but also go into the public sector. So the principles of matching remuneration with productivity is something that we are going to hold dear and that we all must hold dear. We have a Fair Wages and Salaries Commission. We recommend that it be converted into a National Remuneration and Productivity Commission to focus and bring to attention what needs to be done. And that the ethics, the discipline that we see embodied in our military personnel, that every Ghanaian, of timekeeping, of taking accountability, of obeying the rules without asking who is asking me to obey the rules, must be inculcated, and a new spirit of the Ghanaian must emerge starting right now. So for the next steps for us, one of our key asks is that we believe that the macroeconomy is often diverged from the private sector. So, Governor, we want the private sector to meet with the Governor, with the Bank of Ghana and the MPC frequently, I'd say at least twice a year, where you can hear us and see how the tools you have support growth and create employment in Ghana. The second ask for us, or our commitment as a committee, is that we are going to meet in 2 months. We are going to flesh out our initiatives, and that we are going to meet in 2 months to ensure that these things, as we forewent our lunch yesterday, this is not a talk shop, and that these actions are being put in place, and we can account and create a reset Ghana, but a prosperous Ghana for everyone. Thank you very much.
Wow. 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 You know, a very famous actor was asked, or author was asked, which is your best book? He says the next one. So my favorite presentation was the first, is now this one. And in typical private sector sense, they even have told us what they will do in 2 months. And for those of you just tuned in, this is the National Economic Dialogue, where the 6 breakout sessions are presenting their findings and recommendations to the government, represented by the Vice President and the Ministers of State and the Governor of the Bank of Ghana and NDPC, who will soon take the stage for a panel discussion. I could see everybody talking about macro, because it looks like the macro is the foundation. Indeed, one of the best answers I've gotten as a journalist asking, is macroeconomic stability food to eat? Why macro, macro, macro? And somebody said, well, if there's no macro stability, there may be no food to eat. So macro stability is the basis, which is why I think it's time to hear from them. And I need to mention that this group was blessed with at least 4 former governors. So Dr. Esiama, you are really blessed. A lot of ancient wisdom, chaired by Dr. Paul Akwa. I'd like to also mention that people like Dr. Nico Akusowa, Dr. Ashong, and a lot of strong economists attended upon that particular group. Let's put our hands together for them. As I welcome the presenter for the macro group, Mr. Leslie Dwight Mensah. Leslie, you are too far away. We can't clap all the way, so we have to run. So Mr. Leslie Dwight Mensah is the presenter for the macro, and the theme is restoring macroeconomic stability. That's the thematic area, and Leslie will lead the presentation. He has a personal assistant. Please put your hands together for them. Good luck, Leslie.
Thank you very much. Madam Vice President, government ministers, government officials, members of the planning committee for this dialogue, special invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to present the interim report of the Macroeconomic Stability Group, this dialogue. Let me begin by providing a context. The context is twofold. The long-term historical context, which is that despite the importance of macroeconomic stability for realizing Ghana's ambitions for rapid development, its attainment has historically largely been elusive. That's the long-term context. The short-term context is that we have been through an excruciating macroeconomic crisis, the effects of which we continue to feel today. Now that crisis has resulted from major macroeconomic issues that have festered for long. A central one is a pattern of unsustainable fiscal policies. We have had, in the 5 years prior to the crisis in 2022, an average budget deficit of 9% of GDP if you account for off-budget spending on the energy and financial sectors. Now, driven by this pattern of large deficits, debt service spending rose to almost 70% of public revenue in 2021, and that triggered the crisis that we eventually started to experience in 2022. Now, the unsustainable fiscal policies have reflected low public revenue generation and especially poor public expenditure management. Unsustainable fiscal policies have also resulted from weak management of the SOE sector that has engendered massive liabilities for the central government. Now, in addition to the unsustainable fiscal policies, we have seen, especially since the crisis, rapid monetary expansion. The macroeconomic difficulties have reflected in rapid depreciation of the exchange rate, persistently high inflation, high interest rates, rising non-performing loans in the banking system, which have driven weak credit expansion, ultimately resulting in subdued real economic growth. And to sort of give you a sense of the extremely difficult macroeconomic situation we continue to face, inflation, which today is around 23.2%, has actually been above 20% for the last 34 months. Now consider this. In the 18 years prior to the crisis in 2022, inflation had been above 20% for only 6 months. So the recent experience of above 20% inflation for 34 consecutive months is one that we had not been used to in the 2 decades prior to the recent crisis. Again, the exchange rate, which depreciated by 19.2% in 2024, has actually experienced instability at a rate that we had not known in the 25 years prior to the crisis. So from the period 2001 to 2021, the average depreciation of the exchange rate had been under 10%, and the exchange rate had depreciated by more than 19% in just 2 years, in the 21 years prior to the crisis. So present rates of exchange rate depreciation are quite high in historical terms. So this really is the macroeconomic background that has animated the conversation we have been having through this dialogue on the problem. Now, at the start of our deliberations and through the deliberations, it became quite clear that a fundamental driver of our recurring macroeconomic challenges is really the failure to address critical, long-standing, and long-identified problems in key areas. In other words, virtually little of what we heard through the deliberations was new. The concerns and viewpoints really expressed a dissatisfaction with the way in which we have managed issues that we have all been collectively aware of as the impediments to achieving and sustaining macroeconomic stability. Now, some of these issues include public sector bureaucracy and inefficiency, and generally poor public sector administration in Ghana. A second issue is corruption. A third is poor regulation, especially as it impacts the private sector. A fourth issue is poor implementation of policies and laws. And Mr. Finance Minister, one of the ways in which you can make a difference as Finance Minister is in your steadfast implementation of public financial management laws and rules in Ghana. If you can top other leaders of the Treasury in your enforcement of the PFM Act, the PFM rules, and the financial rules of the public sector, you will make a difference as Finance Minister. Because, Mr. Minister, it became clear in the deliberations that whereas the PFM law requires the government of Ghana to report regularly on the expenditure arrears of government, on the contingent liabilities of government, on the cost and efficiency of tax expenditures, these reporting requirements have in the main not been complied with. So it's clear where you can make a difference. Another fundamental issue is generally low productivity, including low productivity in the public sector. Now, in addition to highlighting these fundamental issues that underpin the recurring macroeconomic challenges, we also tackled some of the more specific drivers of macroeconomic stability. And we did this discussion under 4 main headings. We considered ways to ensure fiscal discipline, stability, and sustainability, ways to ensure effective monetary policy and exchange rate stability, ways to ensure financial sector stability, and then addressing additional issues that could impinge on short and long-term macroeconomic stability. Now, on the fiscal policy issues, we call for the government to embark on major tax reforms, a key focus of which should be to simplify the tax regime. Mr. Minister, we want you to make it a point to ensure that your tax policies are made in a medium-term framework that ensures predictability of the tax regime. This is quite important, that the tax regime is made to be predictable, and that would require that tax and revenue policy is conducted in a medium-term framework to allow the private sector to manage their operations in a macroeconomic environment that reflects certainty and predictability. On tax reform, we also urge that the VAT system be reformed. And this reform should aim to address the existing wide VAT gap. The present VAT gap is more than 50%. In other words, the actual VAT collection reflects less than half of what we should be collecting. So the reform of the VAT regime should aim at reducing the VAT gap. Now, as you conduct this reform, we advise also that you consider revising downwards the VAT rate to enable improved compliance and stronger collection. On fiscal policy and revenue generation, we would like the minister to review the fiscal regime in the extractive sector, to increase the revenue to the public sector from that industry. We believe that the extractive sector can be a central element of our effort to rapidly improve public sector revenue generation. And we believe this should be an important focus of revenue policy going forward. Still on revenue, we would like to see a reform of property tax administration. And this reform should consider ways to leverage technology to improve compliance and collection. Property tax administration has been a key weakness of the revenue system. And Mr. Minister, again, one of the ways in which you can make a difference would be to emerge as a minister under whose watch our local government authorities dramatically improve local revenue generation, including through property taxes. To give you an example, the Accra Metropolitan Assembly is perhaps one of the richer local government authorities in Ghana. Yet research shows that the AMA has a property tax under collection rate of more than 60%. Mr. Minister, that has to change by the end of your tenure as Finance Minister. That has to change. In fact, I advise you to find out the under collection rate as of now at the start of your term and to set for yourself a target to rapidly and dramatically improve that situation you have inherited. Would also like the administration to embark upon the most comprehensive tax education and sensitization program we have seen in this country since independence, with the objective of improving tax compliance. We want to see a campaign that never before has been seen in Ghana about the citizens' obligation to pay their taxes. I turn now to expenditure management, where we call for strict enforcement of the rules governing budget preparation, approval, implementation, and parliamentary oversight. We call also for the establishment of a credible medium-term expenditure framework that ensures adequate provision of funding for projects before commencement. Mr. Minister, when you present your budget and the medium-term estimates, we want you to ensure that the medium-term expenditure framework really reflects the medium-term fiscal intentions of the government. They should not be estimates that are put there simply to tick the box. We want to see a reform of public sector procurement. That should include, among others, developing benchmark prices to guide public agencies in their procurement activities to ensure transparency and value for money. Under procurement reform, we call for regular forensic audits of public procurement to address issues of waste and corruption. I turn now to reducing fiscal risk through reform of SOEs. We call for the enforcement of transparent financial reporting and good corporate governance practices at SOEs. And we urge also that the government establish a performance-based compensation system for the SOE sector, one that links pay and compensation within SOEs to deliverables aligned with the government's priorities. With regard to PFM and other fiscal reforms that can support fiscal stability and macroeconomic stability, we call for a review of the Fiscal Responsibility Act to strengthen the fiscal rules, their enforcement, and parliamentary oversight, especially regarding suspension of the rules in the event of an emergency. Among others, we would like to see the fiscal rule contain a debt ceiling. We also call for and endorse the government's manifesto commitment to establish an independent, legally backed fiscal council, which would serve as a citizens' board for surveillance of government. To improve monetary policy operations and their effectiveness, we recommend enhancing coordination between the Ministry of Finance and the Bank of Ghana to ensure fiscal and monetary policy alignment. And Mr. Minister, we particularly call for ensuring daily coordination of monetary and fiscal policy. The recent decline in T-bill rates, although a development that has brought you much joy and happiness, has caused ripples in monetary policy circles. So we advise that you strengthen and enhance coordination with the monetary authorities. To improve the operation of foreign exchange markets to contribute to exchange rate stability, we urge the central bank to work with key stakeholders to integrate fintech liquidity and transactions into overall banking system liquidity. Further, to improve foreign exchange markets, we call for strengthening the regulation of foreign exchange bureaus and the elimination of illegal foreign exchange markets. We also request the government to review the foreign exchange retention regime in various sectors, including the mineral sector, to support exchange rate stability. On strengthening the banking system and financial intermediation, we call for the recapitalization of the Bank of Ghana to empower and strengthen the central bank to conduct its monetary policy and financial stability functions. We also call on the central bank to conduct a feasibility study and to develop a regulatory framework for non-interest banking. To strengthen financial stability, on top of measures already undertaken by the central bank, we call on the fiscal authorities to prioritize improving Ghana's sovereign credit rating, because the present rating situation of the country has been a major challenge to the operations of the banking system. So we invite the Ministry of Finance and the Bank of Ghana to actually establish a desk between them that will be responsible for engaging with the ratings agencies to update them about fiscal and monetary reforms, to update them about economic developments, to ensure that we influence the sentiments that inform their ratings. Finally, to address one. All right. Thank you. Finally, just the final point on cross-cutting issues. We call for an improvement in the regulatory environment to ensure that regulations that affect the private sector are carefully designed to encourage private sector growth and development rather than hinder private sector growth. We call further for measures to improve productivity across all sectors of the economy, recognizing that without improving productivity, our objective of improving revenue generation would not be realized. Thank you very much.
If anybody, put your hands together for him. Leslie, well done. If anybody was under any illusion that macro management was easy, now you know it's not hard, it's not easy. The guy is sweating in air conditioning. We can only pray for the governor and his team in the finance ministry because macro is tough. Great job. Put your hands together one more time for Leslie. Wow. We're still live here at the National Economic Dialogue, bringing you the findings from the 6 thematic areas. We've so far dealt with growth with depth, where Mavis Owusu Jemfi gave us a presentation from that particular thematic area. We've also heard from the private sector-led group. Ms. Abna Amwa took us through a presentation on what they want to see. We just heard from the Restoring Macro Stability team, where Mr. Leslie Dwight Mensah took us through their key recommendations. We're now moving to structural / policy reforms. This group decided to focus on 2 big elephants. The first one is called ECG, and the second one is called Cocobod. Interestingly, the private sector group identified those 2 elephants as well. They are bad elephants. They will be chased to the bush in the next few minutes. Let's welcome Dr. KK Sapon, who's the chair. His team comprised some very important people from the parastatals within that sector. And I'd like to commend Togbe Apede and Co. and his team, Mr. Kwame Pionim. It was a very, very interesting discussion they had. So please put up his slide whilst he comes. So Dr. KK Sapon chaired the Structural Reform Committee. I think we need to see the slide before he comes. Oh, okay, put your hands together for him. He's coming. Eli Klim Apetogbo was the presenter. So Eli, rise. Let's acknowledge you as well. And okay, committee members, please rise so we see you. Committee members of the Structural and Policy Reform, Togbe, Mr. Kwampianim, Dr. Kwamna Donko, the World Bank gentleman. Thank you, Doc, as well. I forget the name. It was a very exciting group. CEOs of the key power companies were all there as well. Dr. Sapong, Senor Hositu was there. Eli Klim, are you coming to do a group presentation? Or you want to change the structure of the presentation for us? Put your hands together for them. Dr. Eliklim Afetogbo and Dr. KK Sapong to lead this presentation. So the chair and his presenter, good luck to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Bernard. Your Excellency, the Vice President, Honorable Ministers of State, distinguished guests. We were given the task of looking at structural reforms of two important sectors in our economy, cocoa and power. We decided to make our work easy by focusing on ECG and Cocobod. From the minister's presentation, it was obvious to us that he had two major concerns. First with ECG and then with Cocobod. He was concerned that the operations of ECG is a drain on the national budget, and that the government dishes out more than $1 billion a year to keep the organization going. Then also, the organization has got a legacy debt, which he's wondering what to do with it, and that if nothing is done, by 2027, there will be a total debt of about $9.5 billion. So we set out to find out, how do we make ECG self-sustaining and stop the annual government expenditure of $1 billion, which is dished out to them. One of the issues we identified was high cost of electricity purchases from the independent power producers. Please, can you go back to the slide? No, the independent power producers. Please. Please put that slide on. Well, we found out that the power purchase contracts came with high purchase cost. We're told that in some cases ECG was part of the negotiations, others they were not. But that cost is now with us. Our suggestion, our recommendation is that these power purchase agreements ought to be renegotiated. And we're told some serious work has already been done, and we think it should be taken to its logical conclusion so that that cost, which in some cases constitute more than 80% of the power production cost, can be looked at. And then we take advantage of that. We also suggested that to bring the power purchase cost down, we should look at renewables. And when we talk about renewables, not just solar. We should look at wind, energy, and others. Once they will be produced and connected to the grid, the energy mix will result in a lower average cost, which will reflect in the tariff. We also notice that the procurement of ECG is not competitive. And this is a point which was hammered home by many participants. And indeed, ECG management accepts that something ought to be done. Please follow the slides because it's confusing us. We also discovered that ECG has got so much operational inefficiencies. There's high technical and commercial losses. And what was very worrying is the fact that the electricity they put into the market, they only recover or are able to get 62% of the value. The question which arises is, where does the 38% go? And if we get a 38%, what impact will it make on tariff determination as well as managing the 1 billion that we throw away every year? We think that ECG must expand prepaid electricity usage. If it's possible, every consumer must be on prepaid. Just like in the telecom industry. If you don't buy the card or the bundle, you cannot get a service. And we think that if we have prepaid meters installed, then we should be able to collect substantial part of the revenue. If we can't get 100%, we get 90, 95%. That would be a long way towards recovery. We say UCG should fully roll out boundary metering to determine how much power is being generated in an area and compare that with sales from that area to confirm any illegal consumption or theft. ECG must improve customer service by responding promptly to customer and meter fault complaints to drive revenue collection and financial performance. Sometimes when you call them, they don't come. And you may go a whole night without electricity. If we get it, we use it, we pay the money back. For procurement, ECG must adopt and sustain efficient procurement priorities, should publicize their audited financial statements, and management should be held to remuneration linked to key performance indicators, KPIs. If we're able to do that, that improvement will help, and that will not translate into higher tariffs to consumers. How do we deal with the existing debt, which is estimated at $2.2 billion, in a way legacy debt? Even if we can stop the 1 billion being paid every year, we still have some debt which must be paid. And what do we do? There's a social expectation of ECG and NETCO by government to supply electricity affordably to lifetime consumers in low-income households. Obviously, a social policy has got a social cost. Somebody must pay for it. And we believe the vulnerable must be protected in one way or the other. And that means that if we have a fair estimation, then that should be a budget line in the budget, which then will cater for the subsidization. We know that ESLA was there. The question is it relevant? So far as we have legacy debt, we may see whether there's any room for ESLA to continue. But if we deal with the operational inefficiencies, as we try to be efficient, then maybe don't be much to worry about. There's also some conflict between ECG and VRA as to who should do export, who should do what. I think this must be streamlined so that we can get optimal results. With regard to the legacy debts, we believe there should be a vehicle to raise funds to service the legacy debts, while ensuring all the necessary protocols are complied with. The options include create an opportunity to release ECG equity in fiscal assets to raise funds. A form of privatization, but it's something that we need to be thought through carefully. Then also, VRA has got some thermal assets that we believe VRA and BUI, if they have to run on hydro, then maybe these thermal assets can be put together and in one form or other raise money, either as a joint venture with another person or sell the assets completely, and that money which is realized can go towards the servicing of the legacy debts. We think we should deepen private sector participation in distribution. The PDS experience is there, but maybe other modes can be looked at. And we think there are various ways that some private sector involvement can be introduced. And wherever private sector is, we all know efficiencies come in and we get results. We think ECG, we need some reforms, governance reforms. It should operate as a commercial corporate entity. If it has to carry out the social work or social operate as a social or a service to the vulnerable, of course somebody has to pay for that. And we believe that if we introduce private sector participation, then the idea of driving it towards commercialization is likely to be achieved. And in that way, we prepare it eventually for stock market listing to raise money locally and internationally. I believe in democratic capitalism, many people getting the chance to buy part of the assets. Yes, we will now turn to cocoa. The minister said, Cocobod operations result in substantial losses, about $2.4 billion annually, between 2017 and 2023. But when we analyze, we realize that whilst Cocobod revenue is decreasing, its costs are increasing. And possible root cause, Galamsey operators have taken over farmlands, and therefore acreage under production has reduced. So Galamsey itself leads to low productivity. But in addition to that, we haven't had a full-scale application of modern technology and agronomic practices. Our cocoa industry still is largely peasant-based. So something has to be done about productivity. Cocobod is also not focused on its core business, and it has inefficient procurement practices, just like the ECG, the cousin. To government, we suggest as follows. We should have a holistic and coordinated plan to stop Galamsey and improve cocoa production and food production as well. This is a major issue for government to deal with. Within our group, for less than a day, we couldn't have come out with any plan, so we just recommend that to government. Cocobod should focus on its core business of buying and selling cocoa. In effect, it has no business doing roads. And we think that that must stop forthwith. The Department of Feeder Roads is there, and arrangements can be made for them to look at cocoa roads. In the past, when some of us were there, we were never constructing roads. We were only helping to give funds to feeder roads for them to do the work. Cocobod also imports inputs which we think should not stop, but whatever is imported should be sold at market prices. Because if you subsidize, as we have now, all of the inputs, a large number of it goes across the borders, smuggled out. So that is a cost to government for no benefit. And the only way to stop that is to let the prices match market. So there's no incentive for smuggling. To increase production, we want to recommend, whichever way government will look at it, to encourage large-scale plantations and also adoption of agronomic practices. We have to conduct procurement efficiently to ensure value for money. We also observed, and the minister mentioned, that Cocobod, through its forward sales and its inability to honor contracts agreed on in the previous season, have had to supply or honor those contracts now when the prices are high, to the extent that in the long run, about $1.3 billion in revenue will be lost. The possible root cause: excessive forward sales to support borrowing to finance crop purchases, non-core activities such as cocoa trade, cocoa roads, and forests to government. From my own experience there in Cocobod, only about 50% of the crop size was always involved in the forward sales for the syndicated or receivable back loans. We think something went wrong somewhere, and our investigations revealed that pressure was put on management to borrow more to support government forest requirements. So we recommend that Cocobod operations should be separated from monetary policy of government. How do we finance the crop then? Currently, some private processors are integrating to the field to buy the beans. So they provide pre-finance to farmers or to the buying companies. We think this should be encouraged. That then will leave a gap which must be financed. We are told the processors process about 30% of the crop. So let's assume that they finance 30% of the crop. It means 70% must be financed from somewhere. Domestic financing. Maybe the need for syndicated loans may not be necessary now, though it served us well for more than 30 years. And this one is left with the central bank and the commercial banks to see how best they can raise domestic CDs to help purchase cocoa. Finished. We have the view that there's weak governance for Cocobod, just like ECG. And obviously, political interference in management and procurement. Just a minute. And then we don't give it commercial orientation. So we think we should review the governance structure of Cocobod so that it is professionally run, made accountable, and made transparent through public reporting. Thank you very much.
Please put your hands together one more time for the structural and policy reform. So when the alarm blew, he asked for a minute. And I was saying to somebody that the alarm is like the automatic adjustment formula. It cannot be interfered with. Because in their committee, they kept saying that the tariffs must be realistic and it adjusts automatically. So sorry about that. Now we have 2 more to go. We are nearly there. I'd like to invite the infrastructure team. Let me first welcome, or at least call for acknowledgement, the chair, Mr. Felix Addo, and his team. So the infrastructure team, if you can please rise. Oh, come on guys, put your hands together for the infrastructure team, chaired by Mr. Felix Addo. And David Oposu Dorte is the presenter. He doesn't need slides, he just needs to show up.
Thank you, Bernard. Good afternoon, Excellency the Vice President, Honorable Minister, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. So it's a privilege to speak on behalf of the infrastructure session. Infrastructure is quite a complex matter, and we decided to reduce the complexity by not doing any slides and just presenting the issues as they are. Now, we are aware that the government wants to do the big push, $10 billion estimated, and then you have an IMF program. So that's the challenge we faced. Having said that, I was going to ask our members to stand up for recognition, but Bernard has done that on my behalf. So we took infrastructure from a simplistic point of view as to what we use it for. And let's first look at how we feed ourselves, and that's with agriculture. And the way we put it is that the recommendations we are making are straightforward. We believe that these recommendations are to go into the budget, and our view is that if the recommendations are accepted, either all or most, if you change the should in all our recommendations to will or shall, it shall be a budget statement. So for agriculture, we believe government should incentivize private sector to invest in agri infrastructure, particularly irrigation and warehousing and pack houses for the consolidation and aggregation of agricultural products. We believe that in view of the need to have minimum recourse, we should look at projects that have some form of ability to recover cost, if not all. And we particularly recommend that the Pualugu irrigation project be looked at from all its multifaceted angle as one of the first projects in the agriculture sector. We are mindful about the challenges relating to it. We think whatever it is, those other benefits, including its potential for renewable energy, can have multiplier effect, as well as the fact that some plantation farmers may be able to pay part of the cost, and then we think government should bear the viability gap that will arise in order to help de-risk agricultural infrastructure, and that will be an example for that purpose. So if that is done, then government should encourage ownership by private sector and the development of other agri infrastructure. So that's for agriculture. Let me move to housing. Now for housing, we segregated housing into two clear, distinct parts: the low cost and affordable housing, which for the mass, and then those which are at the higher end. We pegged the low cost as $50,000 and below, equivalent in CD terms. So having said that, we have reason to believe that the law we already have on the ground regarding the vatable component of real estate may come back. But if it will, then the team agreed with the proposal by Grader that it should be graduated, and that those infrastructure relating to housing 50,000 and below should be zero rated, whereas the rest are graduated from 1% upwards to 5%. We have the table of what the amounts are, and we shall make it available. Having said that, we think SEC, as the Securities and Exchange Commission, GSC, Abnamwa just left here, and GIF and other allied agencies should work with Ministry of Finance to structure more investable instruments of asset classes, and this affect other infrastructure sectors, not only housing, because we think one of the challenges of pension funds playing a role in this is the way we don't have clearly defined investable asset classes for fund managers. I sit on a fund management board, so I have an idea of what I'm talking about. Having said that, we think Tier 1 and Tier 2 pension funds, as is SNIT and Tier 2, should come in and allow pension funds not only to be used, if possible, in an untaxable deposit arrangement for the low income, that's the 50,000 and below, but also as a recourse to default. So that way, we should be able to de-risk the market. Having said that, I think there is quite a lot of talk about the cost of infrastructure generally, and I'll return to this subject, Excellency, as I proceed. But we tend to overlook the other things that contribute to cost. I just had a presentation on ECG, inability to recover all their, as it were, the payments. But part of it is attributable to our failure to enforce development control provisions under special plans under Act 925. If we do that, things will become much easier, and the cost of development of housing will be stepped down. So we made a recommendation as well. Then we took at university education. There is a report I've had the privilege of having a look at. It appears, notwithstanding the huge increase in the enrollment of children for schools, it turns out that our population growth is actually ahead of the supply of infrastructure for schools and our ability to accommodate. I've heard about 60,000 admissions and the rest. So having said that, we believe that structures exist now for entities like GIF to help develop student accommodation there's a feasibility of a bankable project to be able to supply about 10,000 houses, for example, 10,000 hostel accommodation at the University of Ghana without recourse to government debt. And that's the kind of approach that we took in making the recommendations. All our recommendations are as much as possible with minimal or no recourse to government debt, because we are mindful about the big push, notwithstanding the fact that government doesn't have that much room to maneuver when it comes to finance. So that is for university accommodation. Now, in line with government's energy transition plan, we also recommend that government should encourage all secondary schools to work with private sector to install solar in most secondary schools, if not all, and have structures to ensure that the payment is borne by the private sector. The advantage is that it will leverage our ability to attract funding in other forms for the sector. The other thing we recommend government should do is that they should have a database, published database of the needs of second cycle and primary institutions which require upgrade as well as supply of equipment and related infrastructure activities, so that that database will be made available to corporate entities who want to select from this and be able to develop those infrastructure as part of their CSR, of course, aligned to their tax and other incentives that they may attract. Again, that is one way of taking the burden off government. So at the same time, being able to attract funding and being able to, align it with the energy transition policy from the second cycle institution. To enhance this, we recommend that the Ministry of Finance through the Public Investment Division develop a bankability criteria which will be used as a basis for determining whether such projects should be done at tertiary level, at the secondary level, and related activities. Actually, we do have an outline of what the bankability criteria should look like, but the 20 minutes we have will not allow us to go into that, so those attachments will be made available. We looked at infrastructure also from standards of living from different angles. The first one to talk about is water. Once we know that water is essential for all of us, we are aware of the shortages, especially in urban areas. We believe that this program, there should be a program to take a look at Ghana's huge potential of its ability to export water. That may sound strange to many, but there are projects, actually, some led by the African Development Bank, to tap into the Sogakope-Lome water project and export potable water from Ghana to Lome. The advantage of it is that that project enables us to earn dollars to offset the tariff in the lower end for those who need water in Ghana and may not be able to afford commercial rates if private sector comes in. At the same time, that project, which is fully studied, and the African Development Bank is aware about this, which is fully studied, or at least almost fully studied, has a component in Ghana which will allow a 360,000 meter cube, 72 kilometer pipeline to increase water supply to Accra and solve part of the problem. And the cross-subsidization of water exports will change the dynamics significantly. It is more of action and concerted action that is required on the part of GWCL and the government of Ghana side. So this is not new. It has been dragging for a very long time. Health. We restricted ourselves to health to only two things. We believe that regional hospitals and the rest are going to be on the basis of government funds. And we do believe also that when it comes to the upper end, there's quite a lot of private sector opportunities, so we did not bother about that. But we focused on the CHIPS compound, which can actually require up to about 6,000 chip compounds in communities across the country. Our findings, and these are backed by evidence, indicates that the government can attract up to 50 to 75% of grant money available to be able to improve the supply of equipment for chip compounds across the nation once we prioritize and rank them. And we believe this is one way to minimize the cost components that the government has to contribute to be able to make health available for all, and I'm talking about health in this modern sense. On Agenda 111, the recommendation is that the government should prioritize the project, and I think the president himself said that yesterday, and bring in the possibility of GIF leveraging its social infrastructure component as a basis to be able to deliver those which can be delivered at the point of a minimum cost recovery if possible. Now, we also looked at infrastructure in terms of licenses on spectrum and ICT. And the recommendation for spectrum licensing is to tie the expansion to specific targets of industries as a fair way of linking the spectrum to allocation of networks and expansion commitments. Government can achieve this objective by ensuring that the network connectivity is extended to communities whilst operators get much needed spectrum to deliver improved services. Still on that, the ducts and crossings should be provided during the construction of major roads to redesign, especially when it comes to redesign of existing roads. This step will incentivize the laying of more fiber infrastructure across the nation, and we should consider using Gridco, Netco, and Gensa network as well as pylons. And ECG, which already has fiber network, should increase the opportunity to lay more fiber across the country to make it easily accessible. Actually, education has changed form. These days, if you are not actually educated on technology to some extent, you are functionally illiterate. And this is therefore a very important aspect that we must take a look at. Then support of connectivity using GIFED fund and grants should also be considered in partnership with GIFED and other private sector entities to increase access to broadband and connectivity. Let me move on to transport and connectivity, which was a big one in the room. And there are several aspects of transportation. The first one is to reintroduce tolls. We are aware that at the point tolls were removed, there were investors around who were ready to put in money on toll roads. And the reintroduction of tolls, especially on the highway as well as the urban expressways through PPP mechanisms, will incentivize the private sector to come back. Definitely there are instances or the areas where there will be financing gaps, but the more the financing gap is minimized, the lesser the recourse to government. And we believe that specific projects like Accra to Takrady, Accra Kumasi, and Accra Flow are areas where government can use these main arterial roads to explore PPP opportunities. I know a lot of people do have sentiments when it comes to PPPs and will try to explain all the theories about PPPs. The important point is that you cannot have a big push without private sector funding when it comes to this. What is important is to identify the problems and solve those problems whilst we roll out such projects. Having said that, I think it's also important for PPPs in general, and these have been used for other projects. The container terminal is one of them, the MPS terminal is one of them, the National Identification Authority is one of them. But it's important to show more success stories. Every government wants to deliver roads, and unless we explore those options, we can't show the success stories to attract investment. Then there is the international component of roads, and one particular road is of key importance. That is Abidjan-Lagos corridor. The Abidjan-Lagos corridor, incidentally, has been described in some literature by the American government as the fastest growing megapolis in the world. For the purposes of those who may not understand megapolis, that is when metropolitan areas across countries get to a point where you cannot distinguish which metropolis is in which country. And between Abidjan and Lagos, we may be arriving at that over a next 50-year cycle. That actually may be the reason why African Development Bank is ready to raise about $16 billion to fund Abidjan-Lagos corridor. But the important point we focused on is that 60% of that corridor is within Ghana. And whilst waiting for African Development Bank to fund, the best we can do now is to incentivize private sector and identify to them the potential future investment opportunities along that corridor where they can invest now. For example, logistics hubs and the rest. And there are numerous things that can be done now to enhance the potential Ghana can gain, and that will make Ghana's component of that project much more leveraged. So that's one recommendation that we make. And we believe that this can be done by bringing in not just private sector, but other public sector agencies that can work with private sector to co-fund those infrastructure, allied infrastructure that I have just mentioned. We should ensure that transportation infrastructure is always aligned with operations and cost recovery. That's one of the areas we are lacking a lot. So you will find that we have had projects like BRT, GAPT, etc., Yalolo and the rest, which have not been properly leveraged. Either the infrastructure component was done and the operation component was not done, or vice versa. The need to leverage the two and ensure that we make as much cost recovery as possible is highly recommended as a long-term measure. Then there is the Accra Tema Motorway ATMP project, where budgetary allocation has already been made. We do believe a continuation of that project as a 10-lane expressway, 27 kilometer with private sector funding will also continue to show success in other areas. So then let me move to the system of management to be put in place to ensure that not only do we deliver infrastructure, but we maintain it. We have challenges in maintenance culture. There was a lot of debate about the road fund and the fact that the road fund has not achieved its purpose, but that is similar to many of the funds. It's because we end up leveraging it for the wrong purposes. And we think that a high sense of discipline should be introduced when it comes to the road fund to ensure that we do not only, as it were, clear the backlog, but ensure that we stick to what the road fund is meant for. That's for maintenance of roads. I'll move to aviation before I come to maritime and rail, which I will treat together. We believe a conscious drop in aviation fuel by the government will turn KIA into an aviation hub of a sort, or will accelerate the impetus, because at times it is just a question of refueling that increases the traffic at the airport, and the multiplier effects of that infrastructure becomes much more. We are aware that that structure terminal 3 has been done, but the utility of any airport is based on the frequency of which the tarmac and the runway is used. So definitely it is being used below its capacity. To incentivize or to rather facilitate its use and ensure that the process lead to the expansion of that place and turn Ghana into an aviation hub, we think dropping the fuel of aviation will be a very good attempt that the government can make. Additionally, we believe Tamale and Kumasi Airport may be considered as regional hubs to attract those who operate within the region, especially to the Sahel region, a lot of which actually are crossing Kumasi and Tamale every day, crossing from Cote d'Ivoire to the other side. Let me move to maritime and rail, which I will put together. It is important to rejuvenate the Tema shipyard, engage strategic partner, or ensure that any strategic partner existing is made to revamp the shipyard to bring it to the full function of all its function that it's supposed to play, which is shipbuilding, ship repairs, and particularly because of the 24-hour economy, fabrication. If you look at the 1963 master plan, it is a major component of fabrication industry, which we think it is being highly underutilized. Other fluvial forms of transport in the maritime that has to be considered is the Ancobra and the Volta. I will return to the Volta. But the Ancobra is actually a way, and the navigation has been studied, can be used to actually cut manganese and bauxite to some extent. So these are things that we need to take a look at. We recommend that the GPHA be allowed to ring-fence part of its revenues to raise funds for port expansion on its own books. This has been done before, but if it is purely ring-fenced, then the flow of funds into that becomes private sector. Still on the subject of maritime and railway, we believe that railway is a major way to attract climate funding, especially to the private sector. And therefore, to incentivize that, it is important to accelerate the multimodal use of the Volta, the railway, Mpakadan. My information is that the port may not end up being at Mpakadan but somewhere else, but that is beside the point. But a combination of road, rail, and the 400-kilometer waterway on the Volta creates a situation where we can actually attract a huge amount of climate funds to be able to develop transport infrastructure in its various forms, and that is almost ready. So there is every reason to accelerate the implementation of that. To also help develop more railways and link it to other sectors, including Wankra and the rest, it is important that the provision in the railway fund under the Railway Act 779 be looked at, and the attempts to populate it should begin, so that that become a basis that can be used to leverage other funds. And at the same time, allied like industrial zones be created alongside Wankra and the rest, in order to make sure that railway plays its real role. Infrastructure as relates to industrialization. Now, it is important that we map foundation minerals to our infrastructure. And by foundation minerals, I mean salt, bauxite, iron ore, and lithium, all of which are not just foundation minerals, but they are critical minerals. The point about foundation minerals is that they are not existing in themselves. They have multiply effect. If you take a critical look at Ghana, you will find that the railway was a triangle, and everything was meant to end at the port to be exported to Europe in those days. So we should be moving from there, if we are doing value addition, which the president talked about, to have a situation where the value addition is actually tied to the minerals and resources we have. Again, studies already exist that we do have $1 trillion in a 50-year cycle if you did an integrated value chain of the aluminum sector alone. So it's important that we do this, and that to do that, we need to ensure that right places are acquired for that purpose. Now, it's important while talking about industrialization to refer to something else regarding infrastructure. The fact that no country can industrialize if it is selling power to strategic industries at more than 6 cents per kilowatt hour. That's a fact. And especially if it sells power to the aluminium smelter only at more than 4 cents per kilowatt hour. This is a tough one, but we need to do it. And the way to do it is not to give discriminatory power to every industry, but to selected industries, those in the iron ore, fabrication, and particularly Valco. And we can do that by exploiting the existing infrastructure which has paid for this itself, that is the water dam, which is currently producing at 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Just in case you want to avoid transmission losses, you can use the Asogli plant, which is next to Valco, and then do a power tariff swap. These are measures that can be explored to ensure that we have that whole value chain, and then do the full. Let me move on. Bernard, I've seen you pacing up and down, but infrastructure is quite important. So I will sort that one out shortly. It is important that in looking at financing, we do not look at financing from the point of view of just the things we have to finance, but what else we can leverage. And therefore, populating the Renewable Energy Fund is a key recommendation. We made the provision in section 31 of Act 823. We need to take a look at that. We also recommended that grid-co infrastructure should be separated from the transmission infrastructure in order that private sector can invest in the infrastructure relating to the transmission. Now, finally, Her Excellency the Vice President, Honorable Minister, we have no doubt that PPPs will dominate the recommendations we have made. And it is not just because we love PPPs. It is because all of us need infrastructure in one form or the other. And I will be landing in the next 1 minute. Each of us came from our homes, which is infrastructure. Each of us drove in a car, which was on the road, and that's infrastructure. We are here in an infrastructure. We receive light from infrastructure. And when we do this and the cost is being built, we forget that our failure to do other things is what will lead to project affected persons, etc., and increase the cost. So if we have a situation where we have a big push of 10 billion, we have the need to minimize costs, and at the same time, you have a situation where there is 48 months for delivery, recourse to the private sector is very important. And we believe if that these recommendations are accepted, we can achieve all this without bloating public sector debt. Thank you.
Wow. David Ofosu-Dote for the infrastructure team. One more time. Thank you. So 2 lessons there. 20 minutes is shorter than you think. That's lesson 1. And you know, yesterday, Minister of Finance said, if things go well, we'll reach a certain level of GDP per capita by 2038. It seems very far. It's not that far, right? Time is actually faster than you think, and that's the lesson from here. So thank you, David, and your team. Put your hands together for them one more time. Now, final presentation, we decided to make last because all of these will not get anywhere if there isn't good governance and if we don't eliminate the big bad wolf called corruption. And for that, the chair was Dr. Emmanuel Akwete. His presenter is Mr. Franklin Kujo. Dr. Akwete, the chair himself, will come and lead that discussion. Put your hands together for Doc, who is the Executive Director and founder of IDEG, and he's been in this space for many, many years. Let's welcome Dr. Emmanuel Akwete one more time. Thank you, Doc. Put it all together for us.
Thank you very much. Good evening to all of us. May I start by acknowledging that the presenters who have preceded have raised the bar so high, especially when your time is up, but you don't stick to it. I intend to follow that good example, and I hope you wouldn't mind. Sorry, my apologies. Your Excellency, Madam Vice President, Honorable Minister of Finance, the chairperson and members of the organizing group for this event, fellow Ghanaians, all protocols observed. Our group, the 6th in line, was tasked to see how we can restore good governance and eliminate corruption in Ghana. I think it would take a lot of fasting beyond 40 days to sort out how this can be done, given the time we have. Nonetheless, I think it's a great opportunity given to us to look at what the issues are. We looked at 3 key issues, which we derived from the President's State of the Nation address, but even before that, he had also spoken about them. He's been talking about 3 priorities, the first of which is constitutional reforms and the recommendations. And the second point has been retrieving looted resources and recommendations. Then, of course, economic growth and maybe sustaining that on an even keel in his tenure. Because there has been 2 or so groups looking at this third item, we decided to focus on constitutional reforms and the recommendations and retrieving looted resources and recommendations. I think the legacy the President seeks lies within all 3, but these 2 are those we can comment on. And the reason is simple. The President has 4 years of tenure. And as we know, the 4 years are not all for policy. I think the maximum that he can do is to ensure that 2.5 years of the 4 will be strictly based on the reforms that he wants to pursue. We do not regulate electoral politics very much. And I'm afraid that the 4 years he has, internal party elections of the 2 major parties could be disruptive, especially when they get into the 3rd year. And in that case, focusing, getting all of us, his MPs, the opposition party, and all focused on delivering the reform agenda would be difficult. So this is something that confronts us, and that begs the question, how do we ensure, is it even realistic that we can deliver constitutional reforms within this interval. The realistic question comes up because just as the President read the State of the Nation, he also said something that is different from what he had said earlier, contesting the elections. In contesting the elections, the focus of the reform, especially when he mentioned election of MMDCs, he made it clear that his party, in fact, reading his party manifestos, they were interested in electing MMDCs, but have not made arrangements for political parties to participate in that, because that takes us to a different clause in the Constitution. That's the difference between the entrenched and the non-entrenched. But in the State of the Nation, he also said, well, if there are clauses entrenched, they can also be opened up. So that changes the scenario. It's like taking us back to 2018 or 2019 when we were trying to also open local government to political parties, plus other things that would come. But it's a bold decision he has made, and I think it's important we see how best they can be pursued. So with a view to this difficult situation, how are we going to manage these processes, party behavior, and all the concentration we need on supporting the election, the implementation of the priorities he has laid? I think 2.5 years or 2.5 years to do reforms is going to be extremely difficult. But we have to see how best civil society and other groups could work with them to achieve it. Now, as I thought about these things, it's clear that if we take the two reforms, we must look at what is strategic and how we can execute that. So we decided to look at the constitutional reforms. And we wanted to look at constitutional reforms not so much in the election of MMDCs, because he's opened that already, but we wanted to look at how how could we achieve this? How could we achieve this? Do we have scope for reforms to achieve this? There is also the question of Public Procurement Act, which is strengthening the implementation of the Public Procurement Act, which is essential to deal with inefficient and non-adherence to the law. We also looked at resource allocation. Government institutions must be adequately resourced, and state-owned enterprises should undergo strict performance assessment to ensure efficiency and accountability performances. These are the priorities on the table. And as we looked at them, unless we all come together to support the president, if it were possible not to focus on our political divisions, but take the period as we've elected the president, a national president, and we are supporting the policies that he would implement to improve the quality of governance and economic and social conditions in the country, that would be ideal. But there is a disruptive mechanism which no one has been able to control. And that is how the parties behave differently, focus more on the next elections. So, in looking at constitutional reforms, we think there's the need to strengthen governance systems to ensure full compliance with existing laws and regulations in line with Chapter 24 of the 1992 Constitution. There is also the need for verification of declared assets by the Auditor General. I think the President has set the standard. He's the first, probably the first in the Fourth Republic to publish or announce that he has, and we all saw it on TV. But we think that all other public officers should do. However, it is not clear whether this will be made public so that the assessments can be done also by the citizens they are representing in the high offices of state they are handling. The second is how to decouple Parliament from the executive. It is essential to decouple parliamentary functions from the executive branch to promote checks and balances in governance. But we have a situation where, in this time, the governing party has the greatest majority. And therefore, that had influenced, to me, although the manifesto spoke about electing MMDCs without parties much earlier. But the situation we have clearly shows that the governing party that has the majority and has been able to secure probably an absolute majority if you add the 4 candidates to its agenda to push reforms could do it his way. That would be difficult or maybe not what we should push because it could end up intensifying divisions. Constitutional reforms require consensus, even if it's not the entrenched, which requires, 75% of a yes vote, whereas when you are looking at the non-entrenched, 2/3 majority, and that they have already. But if we set that precedent, it might also create problems for reforms that requires that the parties come together to get them through. So we need to look at this extremely carefully and see whether there will be other means of not leaving the two parties, the minority and the majority as we see them today, but probably if there's a state mechanism that could get them to reason through, build consensus, so we do not see the politics of we have the majority, we'll do what we like, which is on both sides anyway when they're in power. So there is an issue there to look at because it's a tit-for-tat game in most cases, but we need to persuade the other side and probably mobilize the public to see how their members of parliament could explain to them the kind of reforms being undertaken and why it's in the national interest rather than the partisan interest. The second is the robust campaign financing regime. There's a pressing need for a robust campaigning finance regime because I don't know who amongst our parties have been prompt in accounting for what they spent in elections. Not the two parties. Well, because Madam Vice President is looking at me, I wouldn't mention the names, but you know the two parties. Accountability for party expenditure and so on is not with EC. EC, when it goes out against this, is often with the smaller parties, and they are not even in parliament. So there is an issue here. How do we look at parliament's executive relationships in terms of the agenda the elected president and his party with the absolute majority, so to speak, wants to execute? How would we engage in a conversation in the national interest? It is something we would have to find a way of doing. The second major issue has to do with retrieving looted resources, which is the major point of the president. We've thought about this. We are asking ourselves, who are those to do it? Based on the data they have, would it be anti-corruption institutions? Would it be the police? Would it be foot soldiers? How are we going to handle it so we do not get into a very difficult political situation where violence could probably happen? We are hoping that there will be a lot of public education and explanation because we can't also deny that there is public support for recovering what others call the loot and bringing back funds into the system to enable the government deliver its promises. We think that the anti-corruption institutions could help. We should first set up a framework and infrastructure to assist recovery management and accountability. I don't know if any of the parties have thought through this, but nobody expected this report. Well, I can't say nobody expected the results of the elections, the landslide, and so on. But I think how are we going to do this becomes an important issue that needs to be discussed, and what mobilization. But it could be well done. Are we going to look at anti-corruption institutions like YOCO? I think YOCO is already undergoing some changes. Can we look at funding mechanisms, independent bodies, the anti-corruption groups, civil society? How would they work with the statutory institutions of the state under the law? There's a lot to be done, and strengthening financial oversight. This, to us, are important issues that we ought to think through and come out quickly to educate the public on how best they will be executed. But I think the last point here that we wish to put forward is that if we are not able to come to some negotiations on how probably we shouldn't run the electoral system that has no effective controls, it will be extremely destructive, or what I want to say, it would divert attention from the reforms. And the elections ahead of us, 2028, probably might be what drives the process. And in that case, I think we have to find the ways in which some consensus can be built without playing the parliamentary game alone, so that the tit for tat is not the way to do the most effective way of reforming our system in the interest of all. We think these two proposals we have, if seriously considered, would probably help us undertake reforms. But most of all, because the entrenched provision is now admissible from the President's SONA statement, it's like taking us back to what we tried to do in 2019, when election of MMDCs, political parties can participate, and that in the NDC manifesto for 2025 elections was a no-go area. So the implication is, now that the President says we can open reforms to entrenched provisions, how will the parties work? Because it's a consensus-driven thing, whether you have the majority or not. And how would you work together in mobilizing the public to support a process that will be in the interest of the nation if we can reform? These are some of the questions we've pondered over, but we think promoting good governance between 2025 and 2028 will require much more than the majority position, and it would also require a lot of patience in building and cultivating consensus, and we need institutions to do this. I'm not sure whether we've worked on these things. I'll end it here.
You gave the impression you were going to spend much longer. So we're all surprised you finished so soon.
I picked many of the things in hours that have been said already, and I didn't want to repeat them.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Put your hands together for him. Thank you very much indeed. Please, just like to thank all the committees. First, let me just ask the Good Governance Committee to rise, so we acknowledge all of them. The Good Governance Anti-Corruption Committee, where are you? Thank you. We see them a lot at the back. Thank you so much. The Macroeconomic Stability Committee, please rise so we acknowledge you. The Macroeconomic Stability Committee. Wow. Thank you, the governor and all the professors. The Structural Reform Committee, I don't know if I've asked you to rise already, but for the abundance of that, please rise so we see you as well. Thank you. The Infrastructure Development Committee, please rise so we acknowledge you as well. Thank you. The Growth with Depth For Economic Transformation Committee, please rise. Growth with depth. And I think last but not least, have I called private sector already? Private sector led growth, please rise so we acknowledge you. Thank you. So we would ask for the seats to be brought in. We'll take a 2-minute commercial break. We'll bring the ministers, 1 minister, 1 question. Yeah. And then the chair will bring us the communiqué, and then Madam Vice President will come and address us. So I'd like to take the quick commercial break, set up the stage. I'll invite the ministers, the governor, and NDPC. In less than half an hour, we'll be done with that segment. So let's take the commercial. Thank you.
Has ended. This is the day. A nation of strength, a nation of pride, a nation of freedom and justice. Ghana, 68 years strong and still rising. This Independence Day, we reflect on our journey, review our progress, and reset for the Ghana we want. A brighter future is within reach by embracing our diversity, nurturing our talents, and working together in unity. We can build a prosperous nation. Let's celebrate with the theme, Reflect, Review, Reset. Key events will include 28th February Crossroads shooting incident, 5th March Presidential Awards for school children, and 6th March Commemorative Guard of Honor at the Presidency. Together, let's strive to build the Ghana we want. Ghana, Ayeko! This is the day. A nation of strength, a nation of pride, a nation of freedom and justice. Ghana, 68 years strong and still rising. This Independence Day, we reflect on our journey, review our progress, and reset for the Ghana we want. A brighter future is within reach by embracing our diversity, nurturing our talents, and working together in unity. We can build a prosperous nation. Let's celebrate with the theme, Reflect, Review, Reset. Key events will include 28th February Crossroads shooting incident, 5th March Presidential Awards for school children, and 6th March Commemorative Guard of Honor at the Presidency. Together, let's strive to build the Ghana we want. Ghana, Ayeko! At long last, the battle has ended. This is the day. A nation of strength, a nation of pride, a nation of freedom and justice. Ghana, 68 years strong and still rising. This Independence Day, we reflect on our journey, review our progress, and reset for the Ghana we want. A brighter future is within reach by embracing our diversity, nurturing our talents, and working together in unity. We can build a prosperous nation. Let's celebrate with the theme, Reflect, Review, Reset. Key events will include 28th February Crossroads shooting incident, 5th March Presidential Awards for school children, and 6th March Commemorative Guard of Honor at the Presidency. Together, let's strive to build the Ghana we want. Ghana, Ayeko! At long last, the battle has ended. This is the day. A nation of strength, a nation of pride, a nation of freedom and justice. Ghana, 68 years strong and still rising. This Independence Day, we reflect on our journey.
This year, something magical is happening. A celebration of tradition, flavor, and community. Welcome to the Back to Your Village Food Festival 2025.
Taste the heart of your heritage with mouth-watering dishes from across the country like Ademe with Akple, Tozafi with Ayoyo soup, Kokonte, Apopranta, Rare Quine, and many more. From rich spices to sweet treats, it's a journey for your senses. We're taking you back to your village.
Oh yes, let's recreate our age-old recipes.
But it's not just about food, you know. We're celebrating culture, connecting with family, and making memories that last a lifetime.
together and discover the flavors that make us who we are. The date is 29th and 30th of March 2025. The venue, Accra Metropolitan Assembly, and the time is 10 a.m. through till 6 p.m. each day.
The Back to Your Village Food Festival 2025, where food, fun, and tradition meet. See you there.
Interested vendors should call 0558-973-973 or 0205-973-973 to register. The Backyard Village Food Festival 2025 is powered by Channel 1 TV with support from 97.3 City FM and is proudly sponsored by Gino.
Please write names. I'll give double punishment to some people. Please clear the aisles. Thank you so much for your patience and forbearance. We will optimize the time. I'd like to first invite Minister of Finance, Dr. Kasela Tuforsen, to take his seat. Put your hands together for Dr. Tuforsen. He's also a member of Parliament for Ejuma Kwenyani Siam. Please put your hands together. Thank you, Doc. Please sit in the middle. And he set us off yesterday with his presentation. Thank you so much. The Minister for Energy and Green Transition, Honorable John Abdullahi Jinapo, MP for Yape Kusou. Please put your hands together for the Minister. Thank you so much, Honorable John Jinapo. It's a long walk to freedom. Please, John, thank you for being here. The Minister for Food and Agriculture is in the person of Honorable Eric Opoku. He is also MP for Esunafu South. Esunafu South. Put your hands together for Honorable Eric Opoku, aka Yenimsewa Bin Sujaso. Thank you so much. Like to also welcome the Honorable Minister for Trade, Agribusiness and Industry, Honorable Elizabeth Ofosue Jari. She is MP for Techiman North. Techiman North. Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. And I saw her in her session. I think Finance Minister was also in a session. She was taking questions already from yesterday, and they were grilling her. Private sector won't allow. The Minister for Labor, Jobs and Employment, Dr. Rashid Pelpo, is also MP for Was Central. Honorable Rashid Pelpo, thank you, sir. Oh, come on, put your hands together for Dr. Rashid Pelpo. And two very important members of this panel will be the Governor, Dr. Johnson Esiama. Please come up, sir. Thank you, Doc. Yes. Thank you, Doc, for being here as well. And of course, last but not least, is the chairman of NDPC, Dr. Nimoy Thompson. Thank you so much. Put your hands together for Doc. So the plan is that we've all heard a lot. And so I'm not going to do any interview. We've heard from 6 working groups who have made many recommendations. The good news is the document they've prepared will be made available to all of you. There is an abridged version and there's an exhaustive version. The chairman will run through the communiqué. What we want to do is to give each of you first, the sector ministers, a chance to reflect on what you've heard. Which of the things you've heard tickled your fancy? Because, for example, for every presentation, there were about 2 or 3 ministers I could point to. For example, private sector, they said things that affect Honorable Elizabeth. The infrastructure group, they touched on agri, they touched on all kinds of things. So what I'm going to do is to start with the minister in the middle, finance minister, because you brought us here and you put us into all these problems. So I'm going to take your initial reaction to what you've heard, and I'll end with you as well. So give me your opening thoughts on anything you've heard that you believe can work, or any clarification you need, maybe in a couple of minutes, your opening thoughts on what you've heard. I'll do the same for the ministers, then I'll do governor, and then I'll do NDPC. So Honorable Atufosin, you go first.
Thank you very much.
Sound.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bernard. And let me first use this opportunity to thank the presenters and the participants for the excellent presentation that we have all observed. One thing for sure, they say like minds think alike. Most of the presentations actually feed into the very first presentation I made. And it clearly shows the connections and the understanding that together we understand the situation and the problems of this country. What is left is a resolve to come together and to fix it. Implementation is the challenge. But we can only implement as a government if we get the buy-in of the citizens. What I would like to say is that beginning 11th of March, the government will introduce the 2025 budget statement and economic policy. Most of the concerns you've raised, you'll begin to see them in the budget. But don't leave the government alone. We call on you to support the government in educating the public, for the public to understand that the time has come for us to reset and reform the economy. We've got to do this together. And so clearly, what I can say is most striking to me, particularly sitting there quietly, is the interconnectedness between the macro group to the private sector, to infrastructure, to all the other sectors, even to the governance and the corruption subsector, the need for us to do major reforms. And so the solution is there. We know the problems. We know what we have to do to resolve the problems. Let's start the implementation.
Wow.
And so I will wait for the communiqué. Then so together, I can use the communiqué as my Bible going into the preparation of the budget and to make recommendations to cabinet for adoption and approval.
Wonderful.
For us to input in.
Thank you very much. Please hands together for him. Honorable Minister for Energy, structural reform and infrastructure were very clearly in your alley, as well as others. What are your initial reactions to what you've heard? Honorable John Jinapo, thank you.
Hello. Thank you very much. Quite scary looking at the issues with the ECG, but not surprising, particularly in the energy sector. Like Mr. President said, today I had a briefing and the outstanding liabilities so far is about 80 billion, and it keeps increasing. 80 billion cedis. That's outstanding liabilities. And so today, if you were to put the energy sector back on its toes, you would have to cough up 80 billion to flush out the outstanding liabilities. Clearly, that's unsustainable. But even more worrying is the mounting liabilities. Assuming you were to deal with only 80 billion, then that wouldn't be the major problem. The major problem is that we have a total bill of about $175 million every month, especially with the power sector. The collection is less than 100 million. And so even going forward, if nothing is done, you're going to be incurring about $70 million every month as a shortfall or liability. And so that for me is a major issue. I take three things that I think we should be looking at. The first one has to do with ensuring that there's a high level of discipline and efficiency in the sector. In 2023, the PURC approved about $200 million as a cap in terms of capex for ECG. By the end of the year, they had incurred 700 million. So 500 million more than had been approved. What it means is that that 500 million was not factored in the tariff structure. And so the indiscipline alone is a major factor. Two is that it's quite obvious that we need a private sector participation in the management of the distribution sector. If we don't do that, the sector will collapse. and we are headed for that collapse. Already, some power producers have shut their plants today, as we speak, over non-payment of their bills. So it's something that you can't have a shortcut. You must necessarily take those tough decisions. And then finally, from what I am seeing, we immediately have to move into a gas to power era. The liquid fuel bills alone is about 1 billion this year. Half of that can build a gas processing plant. That will save us about 600 million per annum. And so for me, that is something, it's non-negotiable. We have stranded gas. We cannot use the little we have to buy liquid fuel. We must bring that gas processing plant on and cut the cost. That will also cut the corruption and cut the wastage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Put your hands together for him. So 3 clear action points. Minister for Agric, about 5 of the areas I could see your face there. Growth without debt, I saw something. Private sector, you are there. Even macro stability, you are there. Structural reform and infrastructure. What have you heard so far, and any specific things you want to do based on what you've heard from the recommendations? Dr. Rikopoku.
Thank you very much. Listening to the presentations, I've come to appreciate the need for our sector to look at some of the expenditures that we incur. Over the past 3 years, the sector received a temporary allocation of 3 billion Ghana cedi. But 51% of this allocation goes into subsidies, payment of subsidies. And this is 3 times bigger than capital expenditure that the ministry incurs. I think there is the need for us to redirect some of these expenditures from less impactful, inefficient programs, shift the resources from recurrent expenditures that have no impact to capital investments in the form of infrastructure, in the form of research, in the form of innovation, to make the sector more productive so that we can impact significantly on food production in the country. But to be able to do this, the first thing we have to do is to conduct expenditure survey in the sector to ascertain which particular programs we can do away with. We have to replace blanket subsidies with target support, and then remove redundant programs, and then also consolidate overlapping initiatives so that at the end of the day, we can deliver on the mandate. Then again, we have been producing raw materials and exporting raw materials. We have 10 players in the sector to be hewers of wood and drawers of water. There is the need for us to establish a strong relationship between agriculture and industry. That relationship must be symbiotic, mutually beneficial, so that we can generate jobs, create employment for our people, and ensure food sufficiency for the teeming youth of our nation. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So if you are following, they are giving us bullet points. Energy Minister gave us 3: high level of discipline, PSP in distribution, gas to power plants. Agric Minister has given us 2: expenditure reprioritization from current to capital, and then relation between agric and industry. So we like the way it's going. Honorable Minister for Trade, as for you, you were there with them the whole day. So I'm sure you're ready to tell us the key things you want to pick from what you've heard so far. So let's receive Honorable Elizabeth Ejare to give us a quick takeaways.
Thank you very much. As you rightly said, I had the opportunity to sit through the section, and it was amazing the kind of energy the private sector brought to bear in bringing out what they think can help grow the economy. I'm also of the opinion that if you want to help a group of people, you need to listen to them. They have indicated that if the macroeconomic environment is good, there are business people, they know how to thrive. And so we should work on our debt to GDP ratio. We should make sure that our sovereign rating is good. And if that happens, the private sector will thrive. Again, they also spoke about policy consistency. So I'm also of the opinion that policies must be carefully thought through So this 24-hour economy policy will be discussed thoroughly with them so that it will be acceptable by the whole country. So if it happens like that, then years thereafter, it will stay and people can plan with it. I also saw a group of people who are stakeholders in this trade, agribusiness and industry that want government to assist them in the area of financing. Financing is very expensive in the country and doesn't make them competitive. And so the finance minister is here and he heard that. So I'm sure together we'll work towards creating the environment for them to get good financing. One thing I'm also willing to work with them is the coordination within the agencies. In the Ministry of Trade, Agribusiness and Industry is the BRR unit. That unit coordinates business registration and things like that. They don't have the backing, so we are coming up with an act to make sure that the things that they ask for, the agencies are required by law to provide for them. If it happens like that, business can be done expeditiously. We also look at land banks. As a lawyer of 20 years standing, I know the number of years that you stay in the courtroom to get justice for land litigation. And so the business sector is not willing to be associated with acquisition of land. They want government to take the lead in this area. And I can assure them that we've already started discussion for more land banks to aid businesses in the country. SOEs. Abna was emphatic. She spent time with me before the discussion that the best way to go is to list them. Abna, I've heard it.
Yes, please.
I'm sure that government will look at listing SOEs and make sure that we get some of our funding locally. That's the only way our pension funds will grow for us to get good pensions. Again, we also look at making sure that we add value to our produce. And so this is agribusiness, and it's now the new boy on the block. We are sure that we support people in agribusiness to grow. If you look at our Feed the Industry program, it's not only about agricultural produce, it's also about raw material, because one of industry's major problems is the production of raw materials locally. It will surprise you to know that industry is importing about 90% of their raw materials. And so the Feed the Industry program will help material.
Sorry.
We are not looking at agri-produce, looking at bauxite production and what have you. So I'm not, if we get some of our raw materials to help. And so by and large, I'm with the private sector. And I promise that my name is Elizabeth Ufuswejari, Minister for Trade, Agribusiness. I will be at the meeting in the next 2 months to make sure that together we build a robust trade, agribusiness and industry sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. We asked for 2, you gave us 6. So you really, it's like the women want to show they can do better. Policy consistency, financing, coordinating agencies, land banks on land litigation, listing SOEs, and value addition, Feed the Industry program. Put your hands together for the minister as well. My friend, Dr. Rashid Purple, you are in a tight corner now because she's listed 6 and you are the Minister for Labor, Jobs and Employment. So what have you heard so far? Any reactions or specific action points from what you've heard, Dr. Purple?
Well, thank you very much. I got excited about the fact that we are resetting Ghana and our focus is on the economy. Just a few weeks ago, I had a discussion with our working people of Ghana, the leadership. We had terrible, very, very serious negotiations to the point that I almost felt that I wasn't going to make it with the workers and agreeing on some specific issue which government was bent on going on, which was that we could only offer up to 10% of an increase in the base pay. But I began to reflect on it after looking at everything that happened, and I asked myself, The first time they requested an increment was up to 35%. The finance minister almost collapsed. And he said 35% will mean that the total earnings of this economy is going to be paid to workers, meaning we will have nothing more to do. Then, so I looked at it all and I said, look, in coming here and in listening to everything, is labor that is going to be the focus. How do we satisfy the basic needs of our labor? It's about a strong economy, a viable economy. It's about a strong private sector that can produce workers, that can produce the required pay, they require to be able to function well as Ghanaians. It's about to ensure that we have a strong agriculture output, strong ways of producing more. So everything you can imagine happening here in the economy, creating value, will have to do with increasing production, creating more jobs. Because in my ministry, I start from how do we create jobs for the people? You get the jobs. Then you go to the next point. How do we get to make sure that these workers are properly remunerated? Then you get to the point, they are going on pension. How do you get them paid after they have worked completely, satisfied that they are earning what they have saved for? So it has to deal with the overall nature of the economy. So for everything that is said here, every increment, every positive direction we are moving will have to have a consequential effect on the positive impact it's going to have on our Ghanaian worker. And so listening to every presentation here, I just got satisfied that there is an aim towards creating more wealth, creating more jobs, ensuring that the working people of this country are properly remunerated for what they have done or what they do to create the country we want. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was a suggestion from the committee that they should change, was it Fair Wages Commission to National Product something. Can you mention, Abna, what was it? I want to put that directly to him. Fair Wages Commission to what? National Remuneration and what? And Productivity Commission.
Yes.
From Fair Wages to Productivity Commission. Is this something you can take up?
Yeah, this is reading the labor law. It will reflect very well what our objective in paying people for what they have done. The whole impact of getting people to work is to earn what you work for. And so the name should truly reflect the conception of the labor directive, the labor legal frame we have put in place, that we intend to create working people. We intend that they will work and they will be paid according to what they work for. So wages and fair wages and salaries doesn't reflect it much. So I agree with that.
You agree with them?
Yes.
All right. Good luck in cabinet as you debate, as you move to push that forward. Thank you. Let's put Dr. Ashiri Pelpo. Thank you so much. Now, the macroeconomic stability has two legs, fiscal and monetary. The monetary leg is Dr. Johnson Esiama, and the fiscal leg is Dr. Atu Fosin. So, Doc, anything you've heard a lot. What are your quick thoughts and any action points from your side on what you can do with the recommendations? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Bernard. Like you rightly said, our group, we had some very exciting conversations, a lot of takeaways. Our rapporteur has already run through those, and so I agree, on each of them. He mentioned things like the need to coordinate our affairs with the fiscal authorities better.
Yeah.
And I can assure you that we are going to do just that.
Okay.
We are going to coordinate not only at the top levels, but then operationally. We used to do it those days.
Okay.
And so we are just going to intensify it. We mentioned things like the fintechs and their importance, the financial technology firms. There's a linkage between the fintechs that are into remittances, and then also these days you hear about crypto transactions. These are significant, and it's something that we are looking into. Our committee recommended that we should probe it further, and so that is going to happen. Now, listening to the private sector group, for me, they made my day.
Okay.
They asked two things, and I want to assure them that we are going to do exactly that.
Okay. What are the two things?
Now, the first one is that they want to meet with us twice every year.
Okay.
And that underscores our vision, you know, that look, we have to be transparent. It is about restoring the public trust. It is about getting Ghanaians to understand what we do as a central bank. And so I was telling the Guta president, for example, I told him we are coming to Makola.
Correct.
We are coming to sit with them.
Okay.
And we will get them to understand why, for example, we need to jack up the rate, or why we need to lower the rate. When I assumed duty, one of the things I said was, with the Monetary Policy Committee, you notice that up to now, you don't get to hear why individual members opted for whether the rate should stay the same or should be increased or lowered. You don't get to hear that. All that you hear is it is a unanimous decision. But in actual fact, there are divergent views, you know, through those sessions. And so what we are going to be doing now is individual members' submissions will be published.
Wow.
And that is going to happen from this month.
Okay.
So you get to understand the basis for which actions were taken.
Wow.
And for me, that is at the core of what we do. We want the academia, we want the media, we want the private sector themselves to understand that we are in the same boat.
Okay.
You know, sometimes you need to increase the rates not because you don't want to see lower lending rates. You want to see lower lending rates, but where there's a risk, for example, to the exchange rate, where there's a risk in terms of your then you have to, go on that tangent. But in whatever we do, it's important that stakeholders understand. And so, therefore, members of the Monetary Policy Committee will be accountable this time. The public will get to hear why they did what they did, and we will publish it in the newspapers the day after the Monetary Policy Committee meetings end.
Wonderful.
Now, the second thing has to do with the demand by the private sector group that they meet with us twice yearly or so. You know, in 2016, when we amended the Bank of Ghana Act, we provided that Bank of Ghana reports to Parliament on its operations twice yearly. Now, I want to believe that they have been doing that. Reports are sent to Parliament, but I'm not sure if those reports are analyzed. So, it falls very much in line with the demand from the private sector group. Each time we send those reports to Parliament, we are happy to engage in a town hall with the private sector.
Wow.
We will be there, all of us will be there, the members of the Monetary Policy Committee, we will be there, and we are happy to take questions from the private sector.
Okay.
But in doing all this, let me emphasize again the need to coordinate affairs with the fiscal authorities.
Correct.
One thing that came, and I believe our rapporteur mentioned it, is that currently, yes, T-bill rates are coming down, and it is good to see that. However, there is an emerging risk that if we are not careful, we will see pressure on the cedi going up as a result. And so again, if you look at our Bank of Ghana bills, you would see that the rate, has had to go up. That's the way the managing the macroeconomy works, and therefore there has to be a balance. So again, that underscores why we need that kind of coordination with the fiscal authorities, and we'll be doing that. I'll be speaking with the Minister of Finance regularly, and we will try to achieve that balance going forward. We'll be transparent. But let me end with just one more point on the area of financial sector stability. We have the financial sector strengthening strategy, going on under the fund program, and we are going to continue with that. However, an elephant in the room has to do with the high levels of NPLs, what we call non-performing loans. To give you the seriousness of that, we have local banks and we have foreign banks. There's a local bank whose NPL is about 81%. What it means is that every 100 Ghana cedis they lend, they are not able to collect 81 cedis back. Another local bank has about 62%. Now, the highest for the foreign banks is about 21%, I guess. So, these numbers tell you that we need to address the NPL issue. You cannot blame the banks entirely, because a lot of it has to do with the domestic debt exchange, which was as a result of, not as a result of, anything that the banks did. But it's a problem we have to contend with. Because remember, that also explains why lending rates are high.
Okay.
It is not pleasant to us to see the private sector borrow at such very high levels. And so going forward, we have to find out ways to reduce the high non-performing loans ratios across banks.
Okay.
And for me, I'm particularly interested in the local banks, especially the government-owned banks. We'll be sitting down with them. We'll be sitting down with the industry association of banks. We started those conversations already. And we believe that if we are able to lower the NPL ratios of banks, if we are able to stabilize the fiscal side of things, we should see lending rates trending down, quickly. We are resolved to achieve that. But as I said, we'll be transparent.
Wonderful.
If we have to take the difficult decisions, we want the public to understand why we have to take those difficult decisions.
Wonderful. We appreciate this. Put your hands together for him. I just wanted a last one. The private sector group under recommendation 7, high cost of production, they suggested that you channel the cash reserve requirement into credit creation for import substitution or export-driven production. Did I quote you right?
That is true. So that issue is actually under consideration.
Correct.
What it is that somewhere last year or so, these differentiated reserve requirements were introduced. I wasn't in office at the time, but I know that it is a huge burden on financial intermediation. More so when banks have to keep the same level of reserve requirements, irrespective of the currency in which the deposit was taken. I can assure you that at the next MPC, we are going to change that.
Wow.
Because it is causing some distortions in the industry. We will introduce the like for like. So if the deposit is in US dollar, they maintain the reserve requirements in the in the US dollar. They don't have to change it into cedis. That will be done. Now, when it comes to the differentiated ones, that is the meat of the issue. Now, those balances are not rewarded at the central bank, and that is true. What do we do with it? Should the central bank become a credit administrator? Should we be lending on our own? That is not our mandate. If you ask my own views, and remember we are under an IMF program, so it's not something we can just do on our own. We need to have conversations with the fund, etc. If you ask my own views, what should be done about those balances? I'm sure you've heard about GESA.
Yes.
The Ghana Incentive
Risk-based lending for agriculture.
That scheme has a lot of promise. Correct. They basically act like a guarantee fund to facilitate lending, to the agricultural sector. And so, if I had my way, I would want to commit part of those funds to augment the guarantee fund for GESA. Because once I do that, I facilitate lending to the agricultural sector. Currently, I have to check what the balance is, but I believe it's over 50 billion Ghana cedis currently. If I can get even 10 billion or 20 billion to augment that guarantee fund, we may be able to increase, lending, private sector lending in terms of agriculture. So I want to assure you that we are looking at it.
Wonderful.
We will engage the IMF, we will engage the other authorities if we are able, if they give us the leeway. We'll look at how we can commit those funds productively. But that said, the banks are better able to deploy those. And so in the medium term, we should be looking at how to return those funds to the banks. And again, in returning those funds to the banks, it has to be in a phased manner.
Okay.
If you just let all that liquidity into the system, chances are that you'll see the CD, jacking up against the dollar immediately.
Okay.
So just to say that we are looking at that issue, we are aware of the problem it's causing for the banks. We are looking at the best way of approach, whether to deploy these to productive sectors, whether to give it back to banks, whether to give it to them in a phased manner. That is something we will determine hopefully before the end of this month.
You're on a roll. You're on a roll. This one, the Johnson Twasu. Wonderful. Our Greek minister is grinning from ear to ear. You are happy on the guest house point. So he says if he has his way, so may you have your way. Amen. Let me end the session with Dr. Nimwe Thompson. So I suspect you on this because you give a sort of permanency to all of this. Otherwise it becomes a talk shop because NDPC holds the plan. So 2 points. How heartened are you about what you've heard? And what can we do with all of this to fit into the development plan? That's your question.
Okay, thank you very much. Obviously, the complexity of the issues are such that we can't possibly do justice to them in 2 days. So as time goes by, we are going to refine them. You rightly said NDPC is going to play a critical mediating role in getting all these, most if not all the recommendations into the President's coordinated program whose preparation NDPC leads, into the medium-term development policy framework, which we also lead, and then the annual work plans of all the MDAs that must incorporate these recommendations into the plans, and we must approve them in conjunction with the Ministry of Finance before they can get funding for that. And so we play that critical role in making sure that these recommendations, these lofty recommendations, find expression in policy. But I would like to play the devil's advocate with 2 points, and then I'll make 2 development-oriented points also. So 4 in all. The first one has to do with one of the recommendations that we should have a debt-GDP ratio of 60%. That, of course, is quite common. No one really seems to know where that 60% came from. Some people trace it to the formation of the EU in 1992 that came up. But what's so magical about 60? What about 61 or 59? As I speak now, the debt-GDP ratio, the highest debt-GDP ratio in the world is 255%, and that's Japan. So does that mean that if we get 60%, our economy, or Japan's economy is so badly run that we get 60% will be better off than Japan? No. There are other indicators that we really need to pay attention to. In this case, besides the debt-GDP ratio, you also need to look at debt service as a share of your revenue. And this is where the critical difference comes in. So Japan may have 255%, but its debt service as a share of revenue is only about 9%. Ours is about, I thought it was 55, but when Leslie did his presentation, he said it was 64. I don't know, I have to look for the latest. But even if we use 50, it's quite high. So that is where we need to pay attention. Not that, I'm not saying that we should go out and borrow anyhow because Japan has 255. But in making these recommendations, we need to also bear in mind certain other issues that have implications for our ability to manage our debt sustainably. The second one is a statistic that I've seen thrown about so much, especially in the media. When you go to various reputable government websites, you see them. And since they relate to private sector development, I thought I should deal with that, which is the claim that the SMEs in Ghana account for 70% of GDP. It sounds impressive, but it's simply not correct. And it's important, I'm not playing down the relevance of SMEs at all. But if we are to help them, it's critical that we get the figures or the statistic correctly so that we can design interventions appropriately. Now, SMEs in Ghana are almost all in the informal sector. If you go to Ghana Commercial Bank's website, they have a report there on SMEs. Some of the biggest ones that happen to be in the formal sector are like the largest importer of cooking oil, for example. That doesn't add much value to GDP because GDP is gross value added. So if you look at the GDP figures, you see that the informal sector accounts for around 20% or 27% of GDP. And if we account for the remaining SMEs being the formal part, then at most SMEs may account for 30% of GDP. Again, I'm not diminishing their relevance, but I want us to have the correct numbers to be able to formulate the right scale of interventions. The global average is 35%. So 30% is way out there. What we probably mean is that they account for between 70 and 80% of employment. That is different from accounting for GDP. And SMEs in general, globally, tend to have much lower productivity, and so their contribution, not just in Ghana, around the world, is relatively small compared to larger enterprises. So if you Google, you see a story that says, why did productivity increase during the COVID pandemic? And the explanation is that most SMEs closed and it was left with only the large ones. So I thought I should throw that in there. The issue of productivity also came up, and for those in the macroeconomic part, they may recall the passion with which I raised the issue of productivity. That's because in the past 3 years, I was in South Africa working on a project on productivity. It was so successful that it was actually adopted in 2023 by the BRICS group. And during the technical discussions, the representative from India said that there was no way BRICS can play its expected role in the global economy without increasing productivity. It's a much more complex thing. But I was very happy that she stated it that way, and now is the platform. It's called Productivity Ecosystems Platform. So I brought it back with me, and I have that passion. As a result, I look at productivity as the golden key, so to speak, to unlocking our development challenges. Productivity in the private sector, which we've talked a lot about, but not so much in the public sector, which is also very critical. Indeed, the ability of the private sector to succeed is contingent upon productivity in the public sector. As long as the public sector remains suboptimal, it will not be able to support that. And just as I did with the macro people, I'm going to show my evidence here. I brought a little speaker with me from South Africa. You know, all buggers like to bring things to Ghana, just to show that you traveled. And the speaker is like the size of this one here. They wouldn't allow me to board the plane with it because of the magnet in that. They said it will interfere with the plane's communication system. So it had to be separate. So I arrived on a Saturday. On Tuesday, I got a call from a lady. I thought it was a wrong call because in the background, I could hear her saying, Mepa Benkwan. So I thought it was a chop bar or something. She was actually talking to me and at the same time ordering food. So right away, I should have known that this thing wouldn't go so well.
Oh, Lord.
So I spoke to her and she said, your speaker is here, you should... So I said, where can I pick it up? She said, no. You have to get a clearing agent. And this happened to me in 1998, so it means nothing has changed. So I got the clearing agent. The long and short of it is that it took us almost 2 weeks to clear a speaker this size with 28 pages of needless bureaucracy.
Wow.
In a country that prides itself on digitization. Now, what would have been the comparable situation in South Africa, where I also used to order? There, you would get a digital notification with a QR code. And you walk in there, and there's a scanner. You show it to the scanner. The young man walks into the strong room. In less than 5 minutes, if there's no queue, you get your speaker and you walk out. So here you see the disparity in productivity, where things that can be produced in 5 minutes, maximum 15 minutes in other jurisdictions, are being produced over 2 weeks. That's a cost to government. And if I were a businessman, that would also be a cost to me running my business.
Right.
And if you multiply that across number of transactions in a year, that's billions of cedis in lost productivity to the economy.
Wow.
Then,
wonderful.
Yeah, thank you for that. And then the last point, I did mention the coordinating role of the commission in terms of planning. The commission also is into monitoring the performance of government. It is not an implementing agency. It simply monitors and makes policies. But there's a third area also of research. And here, in terms of researching the economy, we've decided to redefine what we mean by economic growth. Because typically, when we say growth, the first thing we do is to go for GDP. And the average Ghanaian, frankly, doesn't know what GDP is, and they don't give a damn. GDP, you can put robots in a factory, replace human workers with robots in the factory, and GDP may grow from 5% to 20%. It doesn't translate into any improvements in our living conditions. So we are moving from the Commission's perspective and its contribution to the research from a one-dimensional understanding of growth to a 3D or three-dimensional conception of growth, which is growth in output, i.e. GDP, growth in employment, and growth in wages.
Wow.
And cutting through all three of them is going to be productivity. And I'm happy to say that we are going to support that with the appropriate research to support the government and also our various partners. Obviously, we have a lot to say, but with me, if you leave the mic with me, I'll talk forever. So let me end.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Wow. Growth in output, growth in employment, and growth in wages. Amazing stuff. I think the panel deserves a round of applause. Let's put our hands together for them. We have a lot of questions, but when you do media interviews, you explain the rest to the public. So you can go and take your seat now. Thank you very much. Indeed. Wow. I thought that was wonderful. What did you guys think? Really, really good. So please come and clear the furniture if possible so that I bring the chair back. So pardon the pun. So if you can clear the chairs so I bring the chairman. You get my flow. So we're going to bring up the committee chair and conference chair who set us off to do two very important things. He will present the communiqué, and then he would also pave the way for our special guest of honor, who is the Vice President, to bring us the closing keynote. And we really want to thank you, Madam Vice President, for staying throughout the whole session, both the first day and the second day. So we want to thank our TV audiences for staying with us. We're very happy that you've dedicated quality airtime to this important national exercise. It's had a truly national character. And I just want us to put hands together for the team that put this together again. So somebody should come and help me bring what's this thing called? Is it a pulpit? I forget.
has ended. This is the day. A nation of strength, a nation of pride, a nation of freedom and justice. Ghana, 68 years strong and still rising. This Independence Day, we reflect on our journey, review our progress, and reset for the Ghana we want. A brighter future is within reach by embracing our diversity, nurturing our talents, and working together in unity. We can build a prosperous nation. Let's celebrate with the theme Reflect, Review, Reset. Key events will include 28th February Crossroads shooting incident, 5th March Presidential Awards for school children, and 6th March Commemorative Guard of Honor at the Presidency. Together, let's strive to build the Ghana we want. Ghana, Ayeko!
Dialogue Chair Dr. Ismail Yamson, please welcome him. Sorry for taking all the time. We did our best. Please put your hands together for the chair. Thank you so much, Dr. Yamson. Thank you.
Well, what I'm going to read is the communiqué which we have prepared in your name anyway. So we can issue it out to summarize what we have been doing over the last 2 days. The government of Ghana and its partners, including the private sector, civil society organizations, traditional authorities and academia, convened for the National Economic Dialogue under the distinguished patronage of His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Ghana, John Dramani Mahama, and Her Excellency, Professor Nana Jane Opoku-Agyeman, from 3rd to 4th March 2025 at the Accra International Conference Center. Profoundly appreciate the presence and active participation of the high-level panel discussants, chairpersons, presenters of technical issue papers, as well as well-meaning Ghanaians from industry, academia, think tanks, and policymakers during the dialogue. Note and comment the spirited nature of the discussions that characterize the National Economic Dialogue and urge continued engagement to underpin constructive economic policy and implementation of our homegrown progressive and responsive policies in Ghana. To acknowledge that the Ghanaian economy is in crisis and continues to face multiple risks and vulnerabilities. We recognize that the macroeconomy remains fragile with significant risks from state-owned enterprises, particularly the energy and cocoa sectors that continue to undermine fiscal and debt sustainability. Additionally, we note the impact of long-standing structural deficiencies and challenging financial conditions that threaten macroeconomic stability. Consistent with the theme Resetting Ghana, Building the Economy We Want Together, we reiterate the conviction that Ghana can build resilience for economic growth and transformation for this and future generations by pursuing a path of increased dialogues and implementing targeted homegrown measures. Strongly support government's commitment to inclusive development and call for the timely, effective, and full implementation of the proposed interventions from this dialogue to enable Ghana revive and revitalize the economy. Underscore, based on the six thematic sessions as well as the plenary events at the National Economic Dialogue, the need for comprehensive and durable public sector reforms to improve productivity as well as increase private sector participation and investment in the economy. We, the participants, recognize that the comprehensive report of the National Economic Dialogue will be submitted to the Presidency for consideration and implementation, which to call on government to 1. Prioritize efforts to restore macroeconomic stability and regain confidence in the economy by enhancing coordination between fiscal and monetary policy operations and achieve alignment, reviewing the foreign exchange retention regime to support economic stability, implementing major tax reforms that expand the tax net, including property taxes, revise VAT rates, and address revenue leakages, overhauling and ensuring compliance with the Public Finance Management Act, 2016 Act 921, and reform the Fiscal Responsibility Act, 2018 982. Reforming state-owned enterprises and enforcing transparent financial reporting and good corporate governance practices. Strengthening expenditure controls in public agencies and resource internal audit regime to be effective, and establishing a credible medium-term expenditure framework that ensures adequate provision of funding for projects before commencement. 2. Aggressively pursue inclusive and sustainable growth for economic transformation. Accordingly, we encourage government to establish new agricultural institutes and enhance existing ones to foster expertise, drive innovation, and stimulate interest in industrialized agricultural production. Review and introduce a streamlined tax system for agricultural inputs and outputs to promote efficiency, reduce burdens, and support sector growth. Develop policies that proactively address skill gaps by aligning current and projected developmental priorities. 3. Promote private sector-led growth to unlock the full potential of businesses. We emphasize the need to 1. Structure and institutionalize a platform for sustained government-private sector engagements. 2. Enhance the applicant awareness and provide hands-on support to businesses to maximize trade opportunities. 3. Direct a portion of banks' cash reserve requirements toward credit creation and provide tailored financing. And 4. Fast-track company registration and licensing with strict adherence to service-level agreements to secure timely approvals. 4. Innovatively address the infrastructure deficit to advance transformation. Key among the efforts must be to A. Introduce a range of investable asset classes in infrastructure through the Ghana Stock Exchange and the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund. B. Revise pension fund investment regulations to align with infrastructure projects, ensuring sustainable development and long-term economic growth. C. Establish a performance management system for road construction and maintenance. And D. Ensure that the road fund is used exclusively for road maintenance and operational improvements. 5. Implement structural and policy reforms, especially in key sectors for growth. This must focus on A. Ensuring the effective execution of the energy sector review policy to improve efficiency, sustainability, and service delivery in the sector. B. Conducting a comprehensive review of ECG's operations and implement necessary reforms to position it for potential private sector involvement. C. Strengthening ECG's billing and collection systems while enforcing cost-cutting measures to improve operational efficiency and service delivery. D. finalizing the review of IPP contracts and renegotiate terms to lower power purchase costs and enhance financial sustainability. D, eliminating illegal mining, i.e. galamsey, while resolving inefficiencies in the cocoa value chain to boost production and sustainability. E, returning Cocobod to its role as an agency under the Ministry of Finance, ensuring that it focuses on its core mandate of ensuring the efficiency of the sector and protecting the interests of farmers. And finally, implementing a strategy to promote land reclamation, afforestation, and increase cocoa production. 6, promote good governance, accountability, and relentlessly fight corruption. I prefer relentlessly eliminate corruption. The dialogue urges government to accelerate the proposed constitutional reform program, link public sector remuneration to productivity, accountability, and efficiency, enhance the capacity of Parliament to effectively oversee public spending by providing targeted training and resources. D, develop a comprehensive regulatory framework for political party financing, including mandatory audit and oversight mechanisms to promote transparency and accountability. And E, strengthen independent governance institutions to complement economic governance. We note with sincere appreciation the unity of purpose demonstrated during this dialogue. We encourage all stakeholders to continue to work together towards ensuring that actions are taken to reset the economy and build the Ghana we want. Thank you. Now, hopefully, my last duty for the day. And it's a very happy one for me, ladies and gentlemen. My job is to introduce our one and only female Vice President, Professor Nana Jane Opoku-Agyeman. She's already very well known, and I was struggling why I needed to introduce her. But I thought I should. Her credentials, as I researched her background, are so profound. But there's one that fascinates me. And that is that she was the first woman to hold the position of Vice Chancellor of a leading public university in Ghana. And having been a chairman of the University Council of the University of Ghana for 9 years, I know the campaign that goes on and the struggle, and very often the women are edged out. But for her to blaze the trail to become the first ever female Vice Chancellor of a university in Ghana is a huge achievement. And indeed, many have since followed. But no one can take from her that she was the first. Our Vice President has many achievements, and time will not permit me to record all of them. But one that cannot escape mention is a passion for women empowerment. Hence, a push for Women's Bank in Ghana. We all know of the negative bias against women when it comes to sourcing credits from financial institutions. Even though when we know that women are more faithful with meeting their debt payment obligations with banks than men. That's true. And the Women's Bank, ambitious to be managed fully and only by women, should be a major breakthrough for women entrepreneurs. And I think the women entrepreneurs here must give her an applause. But there's one other thing I must mention, and it is her passion for change and her abhorrence for orthodoxy. Recently, I spoke to her about the need to reset Ghana. And I was profoundly surprised at her burning desire to see Ghana transform from a debt-burdened country which has impoverished its citizens to a country whose economic management has been in the hands of foreign institutions for a very long time, to one that takes its own destiny in its own hands and manages its own affairs with pride. Transforming Ghana to her is something that cannot be delayed any longer. So, we could not have chosen any one better or more appropriate to chair this closing session of the 2025 National Economic Dialogue than Her Excellency, the Vice President, Professor Nana Jane Opoku-Agyeman. It is therefore my pleasure and singular honor to call on Her Excellency to mount the stage to give her closing remarks.
The battle has ended. This is the day. A nation of strength, a nation of pride, a nation of freedom and justice. Ghana, 68 years strong and still rising. This Independence Day, we reflect on our journey, review our progress, and reset for the Ghana we want. A brighter future is within reach by embracing our diversity, nurturing our talents, and working together in unity. We can build a prosperous nation. Let's celebrate with the theme Reflect, Review, Reset. Key events will include 28th February Crossroads shooting incident, 5th March Presidential Awards for school children, and 6th March Commemorative Guard of Honor at the Presidency. Together, let's strive to build the Ghana we want. Ghana, Ayeko!
At long last, the battle has ended.
This is the day. A nation of strength, a nation of pride, a nation of freedom and justice. Ghana, 68 years strong and still rising. This Independence Day, we reflect on our journey, review our progress, and reset for the Ghana we want. A brighter future is within reach by embracing our diversity, nurturing our talents, and working together in unity. We can build a prosperous nation. Let's celebrate with the theme Reflect, Review, Reset. Key events will include 28th February Crossroads shooting incident, 5th March Presidential Awards for school children, and 6th March Commemorative Guard of Honor.
Please resume your seats. Thank you very much. And Uncle Yamson, thank you so much for the kind introduction. Although you were close to embarrassing me, but it's okay. So the chairman and members of the planning committee, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, participants, the press, all of us who are here, who've been here since yesterday, I bring you warm appreciation and greetings. As we draw this national economic dialogue to a close, I want to extend my gratitude to each one of you for your active participation, thought leadership, and unwavering commitment to the future of Ghana's economy. The dialogue over these past 2 days has been insightful, productive, and has set the stage for a bold and transformative agenda. The theme, building a resilient and inclusive economy, resetting the foundations for sustainable growth, has been central to the concerns, discussions, and reflections that you have held. It has been clear from the dialogue that the journey ahead will require a strategic reset grounded in restoring stability and fostering growth and benefits for every Ghanaian. Our focus the 2 days has been addressing key drivers for national development. The dialogue has underscored the urgency of restoring confidence in our economy by maintaining macroeconomic stability, steadying inflation, strengthening our currency, and creating fiscal policies to support long-term sustainable growth, and of course also to align our policies with fiscal discipline and sound economic management. We recognize that growth must be broad-based, it must be deep. It should cut both vertically and horizontally. We must move away from over-reliance on a few sectors in order to enhance our competitiveness at all levels. The importance of improving productivity, embracing technology, and prioritizing human well-being through inclusive economic growth cannot be lost on any one of us. Infrastructure development as a stimulant to economic growth is pivotal. Modernizing our transport, energy, and communication systems remain important to make sure that infrastructure investments also align with long-term development goals. The benefits of such actions are improved connectivity, reduced costs, and unlocking new opportunities for businesses and communities across the country. In all of this, we must ensure that the structural and policy reforms support a more resilient and competitive economy, especially in key areas or key sectors such as agriculture, education, healthcare, social welfare, and others. Our commitment is to continuously review and adapt our policies to meet the needs of a changing global economy. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, a private sector-led growth model is important. We need an enabling environment that allows businesses to thrive through improved access to finance, better infrastructure, or creating a more competitive business environment. We must strengthen the private sector as the engine of growth. This must go beyond just being mentioned too often. We need to act on that and ensure that it is capable of creating even more jobs and driving innovations. We must anchor these interventions on good governance and fighting corruption. Effective governance is essential for improving public sector efficiency, enhancing transparency, and strengthening institutions to eliminate corruption. The reset agenda is both ambitious and necessary. It requires a concerted effort from all of us, that is government, private sector, civil society, every Ghanaian citizen. And I want to assure you that the government of Ghana is fully committed to translating these resolutions into concrete action. I have noted all the homework you have given us. Our promise is to collaborate with all sectors and all sections of Ghana to ensure that we deliver a homework worthy of an A. We will work with stakeholders so that the action points are implemented effectively. This means ensuring that we take sustained action in the areas of fiscal reforms, private sector support, infrastructure development, and good governance. Furthermore, we need to track progress, remain transparent in our efforts, and definitely, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, accountability will be a central pillar in the implementation process. In the months and years to come, we promise to stay engaged with you, to monitor our progress, ensure that we are delivering on the strategies proposed during this dialogue. We are confident that with sustained collaboration, determination, and collective action, we will build a more resilient, inclusive, and prosperous Ghana. Again, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, if on this important journey we reduce reliance on unhelpful direction, move towards a truly economically independent country, capable at the minimum of feeding itself, when we make judicious use of human and natural resources, reduce poverty as an objective, and aim at its elimination, when we ensure that decisions and actions reflect the voices of our different demographics in this forward march, we should be on a good path in making a lasting contribution to building the Ghana we all want together. I want to thank all of you for your attention, and I also want to thank especially the speakers, the rapporteurs, all of you for making the two-day dialogue effective. It is a dialogue, so it hasn't ended. We will continue. Thank you very much.
Please, let's not forget yesterday. Let's put our hands together one more time. Please be seated. Thank you, Madam Vice President. Thank you so very much. The last thing I'll add is that since you're an English professor, please forgive any grammatical errors that we did throughout the 2 days. Because I noticed you were paying particular attention to the things we were saying. The committee will present a comprehensive report to His Excellency the President when they put everything together. The Finance Ministry will incorporate a lot of what has been said here in Tuesday's budget. Am I correct? Tuesday, 11th March. And the media will monitor every promise made to make sure that you fulfill them. That is my assurance on behalf of my colleagues. Having said this, all right. Thank you. Having said this, I'd like to invite finally a member of the committee and Commissioner General of the Ghana Revenue Authority, Mr. Anthony Sapong, to bring to us the vote of thanks. Please, let's welcome Mr. Sapong. You have a very difficult job. So as for you, I'll be praying for you.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, the first and only female Vice President of the Republic of Ghana, Professor Nana Jane Opoku Agyemang. I have two requests to make at the moment. First,
to recognize my sector minister, Dr. Kassel Atuhe-Forson, for being here. And second, with your permission, Your Excellency, to stand on all existing protocols because I know time is far spent. And therefore, to recognize each and every one of you at the hall, and also all Ghanaians and our partners who are joining us online. Your Excellency, our elders say, Sankofa Yenchi, this is a Ghanaian proverb, which means looking back to inform or to create a path to the future is not an abominable act. Your Excellency, this traditional Ghanaian proverb or wisdom connotes a periodic self-examination of life, reassessment or taking stock of the path that a person or a group is following in life, and most importantly, calibrating and deciding to take a bold and appropriate actions to reset the path to a desired aspiration or destination. This wisdom, Your Excellency, aptly embodies the President's vision of resetting Ghana, and in particular, the theme for the 2025 National Economic Dialogue, Resetting Ghana, Building the Economy We Want Together. You would all agree with me that it has been a very participatory, inclusive, insightful, and a rigorous two-day session to rethink of building our economy together. This would not have been possible without a vision set by our President, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama. Your Excellency, the Vice President, may I respectfully request you to convey our sincere appreciation to our President for his leadership and guidance on this course. Similarly, Your Excellency, you were present yesterday and you are here today, this afternoon till now. You have carried on your lap as a true leader and a mother, let me say that. Thank you for your presence and your tangible support in our quest to look back to cut the path to our collective future. May you all give a round of applause for our President and our Vice. To our moderators, presenters, and the entire discussants, you have committed your time, knowledge, ideas, and presence over the last 2 days. Above all, you have been incisive and candid with your assessment of our current economic situation and recommended actions to be implemented. Indeed, you have been fearless in the outcomes you have shared in your respective sessions. You indeed deserve a great round of applause. Our supporting leadership, Council of State, Ministers of State, Members of Parliament, CEOs and captains of industry, private sector groups, leaders of government institutions, civil society organizations, professional institutes and associations. On behalf of the committee and our chairman, I say I echo to you, we couldn't have done this without you. And to our members of the diplomatic corps, including our high commissioners and ambassadors and our development partners, your presence has been reassuring. Thank you for supporting the cause of Ghana. To our traditional authorities, religious leaders, and representatives of political parties, your support and wise counsel cannot be taken for granted. I stand on behalf of all of us to recognize you. Thank you for supporting us. The supporting and organizing team, the logistics team, the rapporteurs, and indeed the rapporteurs were provided by what we call the Big Four in the accounting world, Deloitte, Ernst & Young, PwC, and KPMG. You provided the resources to support the capturing of the deliberations of the last 2 days. And then, of course, our able two MCs, Bernard and Shimama, and then the media as well. You have actually carried, particularly the media, you have carried the wings, you have been the wings which have carried what has gone in the hall to all Ghanaians for the last 2 days. We can all agree that the organization of such a dialogue couldn't have been possible without these groups working behind the scene. Again, thank you on behalf of the chairman of the committee. To the general public, we cannot discount your tremendous interest in this dialogue. Thank you for supporting the cause of Ghana. Your Excellency, I cannot end without calling out the demanding work that has been done by the Planning Committee. Our chairman, Dr. Nyamson, and all members, your commitment to get this done in time and to achieve a great outcome to meet the vision of our president cannot be ignored. And Chairman, I knew a few times I have to drag you in the morning to, you avoided going to play golf, but I enjoyed the riding, but forgive me for all the draggings. May I ask you to give a round of applause to our committee for a good job done. And to everyone who has been involved in whichever capacity that I have not mentioned, I stand here to salute you all. Your Excellency, in conclusion, the unexamined life is not worth living, says Socrates. Our President and our Vice President, you have shown the way, and we have responded together with enthusiasm to support your cause with all our will and our might to reset Ghana and to build the economy we want together. Indeed, to all of us, it is time for action to place our minds, our hearts, and our hands in support of the journey ahead. May God bless and help us reset and build our nation and homeland, Ghana. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sapong. Mercy, mercy, mercy. The devil is a liar. Thank you for thanking us. We were planning to give you refreshment, but I think that because of the cost-cutting measures of the finance minister, we've scrapped that. So this is the first implementation of your objective, so no refreshment. Everybody should go home and eat in their house. And it will save the country money. So this is the protocol for going. We'll rise, we'll have the nation's second song, Yanara Assassini. After the Vice President will take leave of us, and then the rest of us follow. Thank you so much. Please rise as we observe the Yanara Assassini. Thank you. Madam Vice President can now take leave of us. We'll wait for her to leave before we all depart. A big thank you to the camera crew, the production team, Silicon House, and all the media who supported us. We'll see you next year. Have a good evening, and bye-bye.
Hello to you. You're welcome back from the International Conference Center. here in Accra. My name is Charles Owusu Kumi. Just gone by was the two-day National Economic Dialogue where the country brought together stakeholders from all different sectors of Ghanaian life to discuss a way forward for the Ghanaian economy. On the first day, which was yesterday, after the initial opening ceremony, where the president spoke, the conference was broken down into 6 focus groups to discuss issues from macroeconomic stability to infrastructure development to good governance and the rest. Now, today, these focus groups brought together their reports, presented them to plenary, and then you saw Bernard Avle invite the policymakers, the ministers, Minister of Finance, Energy, Agric, Minister of Labour, the Governor of the Bank of Ghana, to discuss the recommendations of these focus groups. And then you also heard the chairman, Dr. Ismail Yamson, deliver the communiqué of the National Economic Dialogue. He also told us that a comprehensive report will be sent to government. Already the finance minister has given assurances that the report from this dialogue will be sent to cabinet, it will be discussed at cabinet, and then it will find expression in the budget, which will be presented to Parliament on March 11. This has been our coverage of the National Economic Dialogue. 2 days, we began yesterday. It has successfully concluded today here on Channel One TV. My name is Charles Osugumi. Thank you again for watching. Keep watching Channel One TV.
For your Showmax is easy. Just choose your preferred payment method from these easy and convenient options: MTN Momo, Visa or